It is 8:05 in the morning on the 22nd of October, 1944. In Brunei Bay, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita stands on the bridge of the battleship Yamato and watches as 32 warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy form up for departure. This will be the most powerful Japanese surface force to ever sail into combat, and for many of these men, it will be a one-way voyage. 5 battleships lead the formation. 10 heavy cruisers follow. 2 light cruisers and 15 destroyers complete the fleet. But towering above them all are 2 vessels that represent the absolute pinnacle of battleship design: Yamato and Musashi. Super battleships displacing over 70,000 tons each. Their main batteries mount 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever put to sea. Each shell weighs more than a small automobile and can punch through the thickest armor at ranges exceeding 20 miles. These guns have never been fired in anger against an enemy fleet. In 3 days, that will change. The fleet is bound for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, where American and Allied forces have just begun landing. Their mission is to break through to the invasion beaches and destroy the enemy transports and supply ships. It is a desperate gamble, a final attempt to deliver a blow that might alter the course of the Pacific War. But Admiral Kurita knows what many of his sailors do not. The Imperial Japanese Navy is fighting for its survival. When the war began nearly 3 years ago, Japan dominated the Pacific as the premier naval power in the region. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor crippled the American battleship fleet. Japanese carriers roamed freely across vast ocean expanses. Then came Midway in June of 1942. 4 Japanese fleet carriers sent to the bottom in a single day. The Imperial Navy never recovered. 4 months ago, in the Philippine Sea, American pilots shot down over 600 Japanese aircraft in what they mockingly called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan's naval aviation arm, once the finest in the world, ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Now, as the Allies push closer to the home islands, the Japanese High Command has activated Operation Shogo 1. One final plan. One last throw of the dice. What happens over the next 4 days will be remembered as the largest naval battle in human history. To understand why 32 Japanese warships are sailing toward what many believe will be their destruction, we must step back and examine how the Imperial Japanese Navy arrived at this desperate moment. In December of 1941, Japan stood at the height of its naval power. The attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled 8 American battleships in a single morning. In the months that followed, Japanese forces swept across the Pacific like a tidal wave. The Philippines fell. Malaya fell. Singapore, Britain's fortress in the east, surrendered in what Winston Churchill called the worst disaster in British military history. For 6 months, the rising sun flew unchallenged across an empire stretching from the coast of Asia to the Central Pacific. Japanese admirals spoke confidently of dictating peace terms to the Americans. Then came the Battle of Midway. On the 4th of June, 1942, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carrier fleet at its most vulnerable moment, with aircraft being rearmed and refueled on the flight decks. In the span of 5 minutes, 3 Japanese fleet carriers were transformed into blazing wrecks. A 4th would sink later that day. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, 4 of the 6 carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor, now rested on the bottom of the Pacific. Japan lost over 3,000 men, including many of its most experienced pilots and deck crews. The Imperial Navy would never recover from Midway. Not truly. What followed was a brutal campaign of attrition. The Americans landed on Guadalcanal in August of 1942, and for 6 months the two navies fought a series of savage night battles in the waters surrounding the island. The Japanese won several tactical victories, sinking more American ships than they lost, but each battle depleted their reserves of trained pilots and experienced sailors. And, unlike Japan, America could replace its losses. The industrial might of the United States was just beginning to make itself felt. By 1943, new American carriers were sliding down the ways at a pace Japan could not hope to match. The Essex-class fleet carriers, displacing 27,000 standard tons, over 36,000 fully loaded, and capable of carrying more than 90 aircraft, began joining the Pacific Fleet in numbers that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Japan's carrier force, by contrast, was shrinking. And worse, the quality of its aircrews was declining rapidly. Experienced pilots, who had trained for years before the war, were gone, killed in combat, or expended in desperate battles they could not afford to lose. Their replacements received only a fraction of the training time. This became catastrophically evident on the 19th of June, 1944, during what became known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa led 9 Japanese carriers into battle against 15 American carriers of Task Force 58. The result was slaughter. American Hellcat fighters, guided by radar and directed by skilled fighter controllers, intercepted the Japanese strike groups as they approached the fleet. In a single day, the Japanese lost over 600 aircraft. American pilots mockingly called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese carriers limped away from the battle nearly empty of aircraft, their flight decks swept clean. 2 fleet carriers, Taiho and Shokaku, were sunk by American submarines during the battle. The light carrier Hio was also sent to the bottom. But the real catastrophe was the loss of trained pilots and aircrew. The naval aviation arm that had once been the finest in the world effectively ceased to exist. Now, 4 months later, the remaining Japanese carriers sit in port with skeletal air groups composed largely of inexperienced pilots. The Imperial Navy still possesses powerful surface ships, battleships and cruisers with heavy guns, but without air cover, they are vulnerable. And the Americans are closing in. After securing the Mariana Islands, they have brought the home islands within range of their new B-29 Superfortress bombers operating from bases in Saipan and Tinian. The strategic noose is tightening. The Philippines represent Japan's last defensive barrier. If they fall, the sea lanes connecting Japan to the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies will be cut. Without oil, the fleet cannot sail. Without oil, the war is lost. This is why Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, has activated Operation Shogo. In Japanese, Sho means victory. It is an optimistic name for what everyone knows is a desperate gamble. On the 20th of October, 1944, 2 days before Admiral Kurita's departure from Brunei Bay, General Douglas MacArthur waded ashore on the island of Leyte in the Philippines. Cameras captured the moment as the general strode through the surf, his trademark sunglasses and corncob pipe instantly recognizable. Speaking into a radio microphone set up on the beach, MacArthur delivered the words he had promised 2.5 years earlier. "People of the Philippines, I have returned." It was vintage MacArthur, dramatic, theatrical, perfectly stage-managed for maximum impact. But behind the theatre lay substance. This was the beginning of the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific War to date. The invasion force was massive. Over 700 ships carrying approximately 174,000 personnel, predominantly American troops alongside Filipino guerrilla forces who had been fighting the Japanese occupation for years, with Royal Australian Navy vessels providing important support. Supporting the landings were two separate naval commands, each with its own mission and chain of command. Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, sometimes called MacArthur's Navy, provided direct support for the invasion. Its 6 older battleships, 8 cruisers, and numerous destroyers would deliver shore bombardment and protect the landing beaches. 18 small escort carriers provided air support for the ground troops. But the real striking power belonged to Admiral William Bull, Halsey's 3rd Fleet. This was the sword rather than the shield. Built around the fast carriers of Task Force 38 under Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher. 8 large fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 6 fast battleships, and scores of cruisers and destroyers made it the most powerful naval force ever assembled. There was, however, a critical flaw in the American command structure. Kinkaid's 7th Fleet reported to General MacArthur, whose headquarters was in the southwest Pacific area. Halsey's 3rd Fleet reported to Admiral Chester Nimitz at Pacific Fleet headquarters in Pearl Harbor. 2 separate chains of command, 2 different commanders, and no one in overall tactical control of both fleets. This structural weakness would nearly prove catastrophic. The Japanese High Command had been expecting an American thrust toward the Philippines. Admiral Toyoda had prepared 4 separate plans, Show 1 through Show 4, each designed to respond to an American offensive in a different area. On the 18th of October, when American Rangers landed on small islands in Leyte Gulf, Toyoda activated Shogo 1. The plan was bold, complex, and relied heavily on deception. The remaining strength of the Imperial Navy would be split into 3 separate forces approaching Leyte from different directions. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita would command the center force, the most powerful element, built around 5 battleships including Yamato and Musashi. This force would transit the Sibuyan Sea and approach Leyte Gulf from the north through San Bernardino Strait. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura would lead the southern force, 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 4 destroyers, approaching from the south through Surigao Strait. This force was significantly weaker, but would serve to split American attention. And then there was the northern force under Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa. Ozawa commanded Japan's remaining carriers, 4 of them, including the fleet carrier Zuikaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, and the only survivor of the 6 carriers that had struck Oahu on that day of infamy. Under normal circumstances, the carriers would have been the main striking force. But these were not normal circumstances. Ozawa's 4 carriers could muster only 108 aircraft between them, barely a quarter of their normal capacity. Most were flown by inexperienced pilots who would stand little chance against American Hellcats. Ozawa's mission was not to fight. His mission was to die. The northern force was bait, a sacrificial lure designed to draw Halsey's powerful 3rd Fleet away from Leyte Gulf. Japanese naval doctrine had always centered on the aircraft carrier as the decisive weapon. Toyoda was gambling that the Americans thought the same way. If Halsey took the bait and chased the carriers north, the way would be open for Kurita's battleships to break into Leyte Gulf from the west. It was, as one Japanese officer later described it, a plan worthy of Genghis Khan, brilliant in conception, ruthless in execution, and dependent on every element working perfectly. Many of the Japanese officers tasked with carrying out this mission harbored deep doubts about their chances of success, but all agreed it had to be attempted. The alternative was to watch Japan slowly strangled by American naval power. Admiral Ozawa, commanding the decoy force, was perhaps the most pessimistic. Considered by many to be Japan's most capable naval officer, he fully understood that his 4 carriers were sailing to their doom. After the war, he would tell American interrogators, "I expected complete destruction of my fleet, but if Kurita's mission was carried out, that was all I wished." Everything now depended on timing, coordination, and the hope that the Americans would make mistakes. On the 22nd of October, as MacArthur's troops consolidated their beachhead on Leyte, the 3 Japanese forces began their approach. Admiral Kurita's center force departed Brunei Bay at 8:05 in the morning, heading northeast toward the Sibian Sea. The route would take them through the Palawan Passage, then across the Sibian Sea to San Bernardino Strait, the northern entrance to Leyte Gulf. If all went according to plan, they would arrive off the landing beaches in the early morning hours of the 25th of October. Admiral Nishimura's southern force had already departed, swinging south to approach through Surigao Strait. They would attack from the opposite direction, forcing the Americans to divide their defense. Admiral Ozawa's northern force would not depart from Japan until the 24th, timing their approach to ensure they were spotted by American reconnaissance at the critical moment. As the Japanese forces moved into position, American submarines prowled the waters west of the Philippines. Unknown to Admiral Kurita, 2 of them were about to turn Operation Shogo 1 into a disaster before it had barely begun. Just after midnight, on the 23rd of October, the Palawan Passage was being watched, and what the submarines were about to discover would set in motion the largest naval battle in human history. It is just after midnight on the 23rd of October, 1944. The waters west of Palawan Island are calm, the night sky scattered with stars. 2 American submarines, USS Data and USS Dace, are cruising on the surface, their diesel engines rumbling steadily as they patrol the western approaches to the Philippines. The 2 submarines are so close together that their skippers, Commander David McClintock of Data and Commander Bladen Claggett of Dace, have been chatting through megaphones across the narrow gap of water separating their vessels. It is a rare moment of companionship in the lonely work of submarine warfare. At 1:16 in the morning, the conversation is interrupted. A radarman aboard Data calls out a contact, unidentified vessels on the surface, range approximately 30,000 yards. McClintock cups his hands and shouts across to Dace, "We have radar contact. Let's go." Both submarines increase speed, running on the surface to close the distance. Their powerful diesel engines can push them to nearly 20 knots on the surface, far faster than their submerged speed of less than 10 knots. For the next several hours, they will stalk their prey through the darkness, staying just ahead of the unidentified formation. As they close the range, the radar picture becomes clearer. This is no small convoy. The contacts multiply on the screen. Large vessels, many of them, steaming in formation at high speed. McClintock realizes what they have found. This is a major Japanese fleet movement. He immediately transmits a contact report to Pearl Harbor and to Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet, providing the position, course, and estimated composition of the enemy force. Then, he makes a critical decision. Rather than attacking immediately in darkness, he will wait for dawn. In daylight, he can properly identify the vessels and choose his targets with care. Data and Dace continue their pursuit, maintaining contact through the night. The Japanese warships are arranged in 2 parallel columns, with destroyers screening the flanks. The submarines track them carefully, plotting their course and speed. On the bridge of Data, McClintock watches the horizon and waits for the sun to rise. His crew is already at battle stations, torpedo tubes loaded and ready. They are about to get a shot at targets submariners dream about, major Japanese warships steaming without air cover or adequate anti-submarine protection. As the first grey light of dawn begins to illuminate the eastern sky, McClintock gives the order to submerge. Data slips beneath the surface, running to periscope depth. Dace follows suit, taking position to attack the starboard column while Data prepares to engage the port column. Through his periscope, McClintock can now identify the Japanese vessels clearly. Heavy cruisers. The distinctive Takao-class silhouette, unmistakable even in the early morning light. These are among the most powerful cruisers in the Japanese Navy, each displacing over 15,000 tons and armed with 10 8-inch guns. The lead cruiser in the port column is flying an admiral's flag. This is a flagship, a prize target. McClintock maneuvers Data into attack position, approaching from ahead of the Japanese formation. The geometry is perfect. The enemy is steaming directly toward him at high speed, presenting the smallest possible silhouette but closing the range rapidly. At 5:24 in the morning, with the range down to less than 1,000 yards, McClintock gives the order. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, 3. The commands come in rapid succession as all 6 bow torpedo tubes discharge their deadly cargo. The submarine shudders slightly with each launch, as compressed air pushes the nearly 2-ton torpedoes out of their tubes. McClintock immediately orders hard left rudder, swinging Data's stern toward the target to bring the after torpedo tubes to bear. As the submarine turns, the sound operator reports torpedo runs, the high-pitched whine of the Mark 14 torpedoes racing toward their target at 46 knots. Then come the explosions. 4 torpedoes slam into the heavy cruiser Atago in quick succession. The concussions are so violent they shake Data even at a distance of nearly half a mile. Through the periscope, McClintock sees the cruiser erupt in flames and begin listing immediately to starboard. What Commander McClintock does not yet know is that the burning cruiser is Admiral Kurita's flagship. At the moment Data's torpedoes struck, Kurita was in his sea cabin just behind the bridge. The first explosion threw him from his bunk. By the time he reached the bridge, Atago was already doomed. The heavy cruiser has taken catastrophic damage. 2 torpedoes struck forward, flooding multiple compartments and destroying the bow structure. 2 more hit amidships, tearing open the engineering spaces and causing massive flooding. Power fails throughout the ship as seawater rushes into the boiler rooms. Fire spreads rapidly from the ruptured fuel tanks, and within minutes the entire forward section of the cruiser is engulfed in flames. The list to starboard increases steadily as thousands of tons of water pour into the breached hull. Kurita realizes his flagship is sinking. He orders the staff to abandon ship and descends to the main deck as the cruiser rolls further onto its side. Many of the crew are already in the water, swimming away from the dying vessel. Just 18 minutes after the torpedoes struck, Atago capsizes completely and slips beneath the surface. Admiral Kurita finds himself swimming in the warm tropical water, surrounded by hundreds of his sailors. Destroyers race to the scene to pick up survivors, but the losses are heavy. Around 360 men from Atago's crew will not be recovered. Meanwhile, Commander McClintock has not finished his attack. As Data completes her turn, he fires 4 torpedoes from the stern tubes at Atago's sister ship Takao, which is desperately trying to maneuver out of the submarine's firing lane. two torpedoes find their mark. Takao shudders under the impact, her stern erupting in geysers of water and flame. The heavy cruiser's rudder is damaged, and one of her propeller shafts is destroyed, leaving her barely able to maneuver. She begins to list heavily as flooding spreads through the after compartments. Unlike Otago, Takao does not sink immediately. Her damage control parties fight desperately to contain the flooding and shore up bulkheads. But she is crippled, her speed reduced to just 8 knots, and her combat effectiveness destroyed. 2 destroyers are detached to escort her back to Brunei Bay for emergency repairs. Now it is USS Dace's turn. Commander Claggett has manoeuvred into position to attack the starboard column of cruisers. Through his periscope, he has identified his target, another Takao-class heavy cruiser, the Maya. He waits patiently as the range closes, then fires 6 torpedoes from his bow tubes. As Dace begins to swing to port to expose her stern tubes for a follow-up shot, the sound operator reports multiple hits. 4 of Dace's torpedoes have struck Maya along her length. The effect is catastrophic. 1 torpedo detonates in a forward magazine, causing a massive explosion that blows the entire bow off the cruiser. Another hits near the after magazine, triggering a second tremendous blast. The crew of Dace can hear the sounds of Maya's death throes through the submarine's hull, a series of thunderous explosions as the cruiser's magazines detonate one after another. Claggett does not need his periscope to know the target is finished. Maya sinks in just 7 minutes, her hull torn apart by secondary explosions. Of the roughly 670 men aboard, approximately 330 are killed, while about 340 will be rescued by the destroyer Akishimo. The Japanese formation erupts in chaos. Destroyers race about at high speed, launching depth charges and searching frantically for the submarines that have just devastated their cruiser squadron. Water columns erupt around Data and Dace as the depth charges explode, but both submarines are already moving away at flank speed, using the confusion to break contact. Neither submarine suffers any damage. In less than 10 minutes, they have sunk 2 heavy cruisers and crippled a third. Over 1,000 Japanese sailors are dead or missing. The Battle of Palawan Passage is over almost before it began, a stunning American victory achieved by just 2 submarines against a vastly superior surface force. Admiral Kurita, dripping wet and exhausted, is pulled from the water by the destroyer Kishinami. He has spent nearly 30 minutes swimming before being rescued. Many of his staff officers are still missing, some killed in the torpedo explosions, others lost in the water. The Admiral's immediate concern is to re-establish command of the fleet. With Otago at the bottom and Takao limping back to port, he needs a new flagship. The choice is obvious: Yamato, the largest and most powerful warship in the formation. Kurita transfers to the super battleship by destroyer, climbing aboard the massive vessel still wearing borrowed clothing from Kishinami's crew. On Yamato's bridge, he takes stock of the situation. Centreforce has suffered a significant blow. In addition to the 2 cruisers sunk, Takao's loss reduces his heavy cruiser strength from 10 to 7. More importantly, the attack has revealed that American submarines are actively patrolling the western approaches to the Philippines. The element of surprise may already be compromised. But Operation Shogo 1 must continue. There is no alternative. Kurita orders the fleet to maintain course and speed toward the Sibian Sea. The formation steams eastward through the morning, 5 battleships now leading the way with Yamato and Musashi in the van. The remaining cruisers and destroyers close up their ranks, the gaps left by the sunken vessels painfully obvious. Kurita knows that worse is to come. The submarine attack was just the opening act. Once Center Force enters the Sibuyan Sea, they will be within range of American carrier aircraft. And, unlike the submarines, which could strike only once before being forced to evade, the carriers can launch wave after wave of attacks. But he has been promised air cover from land-based aircraft operating from fields in the Philippines. Japanese fighters are supposed to provide combat air patrol over the fleet as it transits the Sibuyan Sea. Whether that promise will be kept remains to be seen. By early morning on the 24th of October, Center Force has passed through the Palawan Passage and entered the Sibuyan Sea. The waters here are more confined, hemmed in by the islands of the Philippine archipelago. There is no room for evasive maneuvering. The fleet must maintain a steady course toward San Bernardino Strait. Admiral Halsey has received the contact reports from Data and Dace. He knows a major Japanese force is approaching from the west. Task Force 38 prepares for battle, launching scout aircraft at first light to locate the enemy fleet. At 7:46 in the morning, a Helldiver scout bomber from the carrier Intrepid spots the wakes of large ships south of Mindoro Island. Center Force has been found again. The Japanese are about to face something far more deadly than submarines. Admiral Halsey flashes a short order to his task group commanders. Strike. Repeat strike. Good luck. The largest air-sea battle of the Pacific War is about to begin. The morning of October 24th, 1944, begins with clear skies over the Sibuyan Sea. Admiral Halsey's Task Force 38 has positioned itself to intercept Center Force as it steams toward San Bernardino Strait. But the Japanese will strike first. At 8 o'clock in the morning, radar operators aboard the ships of Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman's Task Group 38.3 detect the first wave of incoming aircraft. Then, a second wave appears on the screens. Then, a third. Each formation numbers between 40 and 60 aircraft, land-based bombers and fighters from Japanese airfields on Luzon. The call goes out across the task group, "Hey Rube." It is the old carnival warning cry, now adopted by the Navy to signal an imminent enemy air attack. Within minutes, the combat air patrol of 12 Hellcat fighters is reinforced by 42 more fighters, launching from the carriers Lexington, Langley, Princeton, and Essex. Among these pilots is Commander David McCampbell, the air group commander from Essex. He already has 21 confirmed kills to his name, earned during months of hard fighting across the Pacific. On this day, he will add to that total in spectacular fashion. McCampbell leads 7 Hellcats from Fighting Squadron 15 to intercept the third and largest wave, 60 Japanese aircraft, in a loose formation. As his fighters climb toward the enemy, McCampbell can see approximately 30 Zero and Oscar fighters flying top cover at 14,000 feet, while the torpedo bombers and dive bombers maintain course at lower altitude. His plan is simple: attack the fighters first, then go after the bombers. But a miscommunication changes everything. 5 of the 7 Hellcats dive on the bombers, leaving McCampbell and his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, alone to face 30 Japanese fighters. The odds are 15-1. McCampbell and Rushing climb to 25,000 feet, using their altitude advantage to dictate the terms of the engagement. When they dive on the Japanese formation from above, the enemy fighters are caught completely by surprise. Instead of turning to fight, they immediately break for home, exposing their tails to the American guns. What follows is not so much a dogfight as a methodical execution. One after another, Japanese fighters burst into flames or tumble toward the sea, trailing smoke. McCampbell and Rushing work in perfect coordination, covering each other as they fire short, disciplined bursts from their .650 caliber machine guns. After only a few minutes, McCampbell has shot down 4 fighters while Rushing has claimed 2. The surviving Japanese pilots finally gain their bearings and form a defensive circle, the Luftberry maneuver, where aircraft fly in a continuous ring to provide mutual support. The 2 American pilots make several passes at the circle, but are driven off each time by concentrated fire. McCampbell makes a decision. He and Rushing climb back to altitude and wait, circling above the Japanese formation. As McCampbell will later report, "We climb to light a cigarette and await further developments." They do not have to wait long. The Japanese fighters are burning fuel at an unsustainable rate, maintaining their defensive circle. After several more minutes, the formation begins to break up as aircraft run low on fuel and are forced to head for home. Now, the 2 Hellcats pounce again. Joined by another pilot from Fighting 15, they tear into the strung-out enemy aircraft. McCampbell shoots down 5 more fighters in quick succession, bringing his total for the day to 9. Rushing claims 4 additional kills. Together, the 7 pilots of Fighting 15 will destroy 24 of the 60 attacking aircraft. It is McCampbell's second ace in a day, the only American pilot in history to achieve this feat twice. He will be awarded the Medal of Honor. The other task group fighters are similarly successful, shredding the first and second Japanese attack waves. It appears that Task Group 38.3 will escape unscathed. But at 9:38 in the morning, just as the Combat Air Patrol is returning to their carriers to refuel and rearm, a single Judy dive bomber breaks through the cloud cover undetected. The anti-aircraft gunners, their attention focused on the departing enemy formations, are caught off guard. The Judy releases its 550-pound bomb on the light carrier USS Princeton. The bomb penetrates 4 decks before detonating in the ship's bakery. The explosion ignites aviation fuel in the hangar bay, which quickly spreads to stored aerial torpedoes. Within minutes, Princeton is engulfed in flames. Her crew fights desperately to contain the fires, but the conflagration is spreading faster than they can control it. The light cruiser USS Birmingham pulls alongside to assist with firefighting operations, playing her hoses onto the burning carrier. Princeton will burn for the next 6 hours, her fate hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, approximately 30 minutes earlier, at 9:10 in the morning, the fleet carrier USS Intrepid and the light carrier USS Cabot had launched a strike group against Center Force, 21 Hellcat fighters, 12 Helldiver dive bombers, and 12 Avenger torpedo bombers. The largest air-sea battle of the Pacific War is about to begin in earnest. When Admiral Halsey receives the scout reports confirming that Center Force is steaming through the Sibian Sea, he wastes no time. From his flagship, the battleship New Jersey, he flashes a characteristically brief order to his task group commanders: strike, repeat, strike, good luck. But Task Force 38 faces a significant challenge. The American carriers are spread across a vast expanse of ocean, too far apart to coordinate a single massive strike. Instead, each task group will launch its own attacks throughout the day, hitting Center Force in successive waves. It is not the coordinated hammer blow that might have destroyed the Japanese fleet in a single stroke, but it will prove devastating nonetheless. At 10:26 in the morning, the 45 aircraft from Intrepid and Cabot locate Center Force steaming in 2 parallel columns through the confined waters of the Sibuyan Sea. Visibility is perfect, not a cloud in the sky. The Japanese have no fighter cover overhead. The American pilots can hardly believe their luck. Below them are some of the most powerful warships in the Japanese Navy, arrayed like targets on a firing range. And at the center of the formation, impossible to miss, are the two largest battleships ever built, Yamato and Musashi. Musashi is a monument to Japanese naval ambition. 73,000 tons fully loaded, 863 feet long, and armed with 9 18.1-inch guns in 3 massive turrets. Her armor belt is 16 inches thick in places, designed to withstand punishment from the heaviest naval rifles. Together with her sister ship Yamato, she represents over a decade of design work and construction, built in absolute secrecy at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki. The two super battleships were Japan's answer to American industrial might, quality versus quantity, craftsmanship versus mass production. Now Musashi is about to face the test for which she was designed. As the American aircraft begin their attack runs, Musashi and Yamato open fire with every gun they possess. Together, the two battleships mount 319 anti-aircraft weapons, from 5-inch dual-purpose guns down to 25mm machine cannons. They also fire Sanshikidan rounds from their main batteries, special anti-aircraft shells designed to explode at altitude and shower the sky with incendiary fragments and shrapnel. To the American pilots, these spectacular bursts look like fireworks displays. One pilot will later describe them as more amusing than dangerous. The reality is that Japanese anti-aircraft fire, while impressive in volume, is not particularly effective. The fire control systems are primitive compared to American radar-directed weapons, and the crews lack adequate training. The American pilots press their attacks with confidence. 8 Helldiver dive bombers from Intrepid roll in on Musashi first. Their 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs scream down through the flak. One bomb scores a direct hit on turret number 1, but the 11 inches of face-hardened steel armor turn it aside like a pebble striking a wall. The bomb bounces off and explodes harmlessly in the water. But 4 Avenger torpedo bombers are lining up for an attack from the starboard side. 2 are shot down by concentrated anti-aircraft fire, their crews lost. The other 2 press on, releasing their torpedoes at close range before pulling up and away through a storm of tracers. One torpedo finds its mark, striking Musashi amidships below the armor belt. The explosion tears a gash in the hull, and seawater begins flooding the interior compartments. Musashi takes on 3,000 tons of water and develops a slight list to starboard. At the same time, Yamato is struck by a bomb that causes minor damage, and the heavy cruiser Myoko takes a torpedo hit that forces her to break off and return to Japan for repairs. But this is only the first wave. An hour and a half later, at 11:45 in the morning, 30 more aircraft from Intrepid arrive overhead. The pilots notice that Musashi has a slight list, a sign of damage. They immediately gang up on the wounded giant. 8 Helldiver dive bombers scream down through the anti-aircraft fire. 2 bombs strike home, one penetrates 2 decks before detonating above the port engine room, causing extensive damage and casualties. Power is lost to the inboard port propeller, and Musashi's speed drops from 27 knots to 22. 9 Avengers launch an anvil attack, 4 approaching from starboard, 5 from port, boxing in the battleship so she cannot evade both groups. The portside Avengers score 3 torpedo hits. One of these strikes forces the abandonment of the portside engine room as flooding spreads through the lower decks. Musashi is beginning to fall behind the rest of center force as her crew frantically counter-floods compartments on the starboard side to correct the worsening list. At 1:30 in the afternoon, 54 aircraft from the carriers Lexington and Essex spot center force and once again focus their attention on Musashi. 29 dive bombers and torpedo aircraft line up on her, while 2 Hellcat fighters strafe the massive superstructure, causing casualties among the anti-aircraft gun crews exposed on the upper decks. The relentless Helldivers plant 4 more bombs near the forward turrets. The Avengers score 4 additional torpedo hits on the starboard side, causing extensive flooding that further reduces Musashi's speed to 20 knots. Her bow is now down 13 feet, and she is visibly wallowing in the water. Yamato is hit by another bomb, and the battleship Nagato takes 2 hits, but neither suffers serious damage. The American aircraft are concentrating almost exclusively on Musashi now, recognizing that the giant battleship is mortally wounded. At 2:55 in the afternoon, the largest strike yet arrives, 69 aircraft from Task Group 38.4. 9 Helldivers from the carrier Enterprise score 4 direct hits on Musashi, which is now listing heavily to starboard, despite desperate counter-flooding efforts. Noticing the list, the Avenger pilots launch their torpedo attacks from the starboard side, where the armor belt has been pushed down into the water by the list, exposing the thinner hull plating below. 3 more torpedoes slam into her, cutting her speed to just 13 knots. Fires are now raging on multiple decks, and the list is rapidly increasing despite all efforts to control it. Yet, incredibly, Musashi is still afloat, still fighting, still making way through the water. But there will be no reprieve. At 3:15 in the afternoon, the final strike group arrives, 37 aircraft from Intrepid, Cabot, and the fleet carrier Franklin. They have come to finish what the earlier waves began. By the time the 5th wave of American aircraft arrives, Musashi is barely making headway through the water. Her massive hull is down by the bow, listing heavily to starboard, trailing oil and debris. Fires burn across her superstructure, and smoke pours from damaged ventilators. Yet her anti-aircraft guns are still firing, and her crew has not given up the fight. The American aircraft press their attack despite heavy fire that shoots down 3 Avengers and 3 Helldivers. The surviving aircraft press on with grim determination. 12 Helldivers plant 7 bombs across Musashi's deck. By this point, the armor that turned aside the first attacks has been weakened by repeated hits, and several bombs penetrate deep into the ship before exploding. 9 Avengers take advantage of Musashi's reduced speed, now barely 8 knots, to line up perfect torpedo shots. 8 torpedoes strike home along the length of the stricken battleship's hull. The final tally is almost beyond belief: 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits on a single vessel. No ship in the world could survive such punishment. Admiral Kurita, watching from Yamato's bridge, makes the painful decision to leave Musashi to her fate. Center Force must press on toward San Bernardino Strait. The mission cannot be sacrificed to save one ship, no matter how powerful. As the rest of the fleet steams away, Musashi is left with an escort of 1 heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers. Her captain, Rear Admiral Toshihira Inaguchi, and his senior officer, Captain Kenkichi Kato, attempt to beach the dying ship on the nearest island. If they can run her aground, perhaps some of her crew can be saved. But Musashi's wounds are too severe. Flooding continues to spread through the lower decks, and the list increases steadily despite all counter-flooding efforts. By 7:15 in the evening, it becomes clear that the battleship will not make it to shore. Captain Kato orders the crew to abandon ship. He hands his final combat report to the executive officer, intending to go down with Musashi as tradition demands. The executive officer refuses to leave, stating that he wishes to join the captain in death. Kato responds angrily, "My responsibility is so great it cannot be compensated by death, and I must share the ship's fate." He continues, "But you are responsible for taking the crew to safety and getting them aboard a second and third Musashi to avenge today's battle." The executive officer reluctantly obeys, supervising the evacuation of the remaining crew. Many men have already been killed by bomb and torpedo explosions, or lost in flooded compartments deep within the ship. At 7:36 in the evening, with the sun setting over the Philippines, Musashi rolls completely onto her starboard side. For a moment, she lies on her beam ends, her massive hull silhouetted against the darkening sky. Then she capsizes completely and slides beneath the surface, taking Captain Kato and 1,023 men with her. The largest battleship ever sunk by aircraft has met its end in the waters of the Sibuyan Sea. Back aboard Princeton, the fires that have raged since morning finally reach a critical point. At 3:23 in the afternoon, the carrier's torpedo magazine detonates in a massive explosion that tears the ship apart. The blast devastates the light cruiser Birmingham, which is still alongside providing assistance. Princeton is scuttled 2 hours later. Altogether, 341 American servicemen are killed, 233 of them from Birmingham's crew, cut down by flying shrapnel from the explosion. As darkness falls over the Sibuyan Sea, both sides take stock of the day's losses. For Admiral Kurita, the decision he must make is agonizing. Center Force has taken a brutal pounding throughout the day. Musashi is gone, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, sent to the bottom after withstanding punishment that would have sunk any other warship twice over. The heavy cruiser Myoko has been forced to return to port. Other ships have suffered varying degrees of damage from near misses and bomb fragments. And the promised air cover from land-based fighters on Luzon has failed to materialize. Only 4 Japanese Zeros arrived to provide combat air patrol, and they were quickly overwhelmed and shot down. Most critically, Kurita has no idea whether the other elements of Operation Shogo 1 are still in play. Radio silence has been imposed on all Japanese forces to maintain operational security, which means he cannot communicate with Admiral Nishimura's Southern Force or Admiral Ozawa's decoy carriers. Are they still advancing according to plan, or have they too been destroyed by American air power? At 4:30 in the afternoon, after sailing east for another hour under continuous air attack, Kurita makes his decision. He orders Center Force to reverse course and retreat westward, out of range of the American carrier aircraft. An American scout aircraft spots the Japanese fleet retiring and immediately reports the sighting to Admiral Halsey. To the Americans, it appears that Center Force has been turned back, that the threat from the west has been eliminated. But at almost the same moment, another critical report reaches Halsey's flagship. A scout aircraft has located Admiral Ozawa's carrier force approaching from the north, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the heart of what remains of Imperial Japan's once mighty naval aviation arm. For Halsey and his staff, this is the decisive moment they have been waiting for. The chance to destroy Japan's last carriers, to finish what was started at Midway, and complete the destruction of Japanese carrier power. Earlier in the day, Halsey had created Task Force 34 a powerful formation of 4 fast battleships, 5 cruisers, and 18 destroyers, with the intention of blocking San Bernardino Strait should Center Force attempt to break through. But with the report that Center Force is retiring, and with the tantalizing prize of Japanese carriers to the north, Halsey makes a fateful decision. He will take everything north to chase Ozawa's carriers. San Bernardino Strait will be left unguarded. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the Americans, Admiral Kurita is reconsidering his retreat. After several hours steaming west, he notices that no more American aircraft have appeared to attack his ships. The airstrikes have ceased. Perhaps the American carriers have expended their striking power for the day. More importantly, Kurita feels a sense of obligation to at least attempt to rendezvous with Nishimura's southern force, which should be approaching Leyte Gulf from the south through Surigao Strait. If Nishimura is still advancing according to plan, abandoning the mission now would condemn the southern force to destruction without support. At 6:14 in the evening, less than 2 hours before Musashi will sink, Kurita orders his warships to reverse course once more. Center Force turns east again, heading back toward San Bernardino Strait. Even without Musashi, it remains the most powerful surface squadron in Japanese naval history. 4 battleships, led by the mighty Yamato, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. They steam through the gathering darkness, their massive guns ready, hoping to find the American landing beaches undefended. 250 miles to the southeast, Admiral Nishimura's southern force is approaching Surigao Strait as nightfall descends over the Philippines. Beyond the strait lie the American landing beaches on Leyte and 6 American battleships waiting in ambush. The last naval battle fought by the guns of battleships is about to begin. It is 10:50 in the evening on the 24th of October, 1944. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura stands on the bridge of the battleship Yamashiro as his southern force rounds the southern tip of Panoan Island in the Philippines. Behind Yamashiro steams her sister ship Fuso, followed by the heavy cruiser Mogami and 4 destroyers, Mikishio, Asagumo, Yamagumo, and Shigure. 7 warships in single file, advancing north into Surigao Strait toward Leyte Gulf and the American landing beaches beyond. Nishimura is under no illusions about what awaits him. Earlier in the day, a Japanese float plane reported American warships massing around the northern end of Surigao Strait, battleships, cruisers, destroyers in overwhelming numbers. The intelligence is accurate. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf has positioned 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, 28 destroyers, and 39 PT boats to block the Japanese path. To transit the narrow strait, Nishimura's ships must maintain single-file formation, which means Oldendorf has already achieved the classic naval advantage, crossing the T. Every gun on every American battleship can fire on the Japanese column, while only the forward guns of the leading Japanese ships can return fire. It is a death trap, and Nishimura knows it. He had expected reinforcement from Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima's 2nd Striking Force, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 4 destroyers. But Shima has been lagging several hours behind, and Nishimura has decided not to wait. Coordinating with Shima would mean breaking radio silence, which could compromise the entire operation. There is another factor that weighs on Nishimura's mind, one that his officers whisper about but dare not speak aloud. The Admiral's only son was killed in action 2 years earlier. Many believe that Nishimura views this mission as his chance to join his son in death, to die with honor serving the Emperor. Whether this is true, only Nishimura knows. But he has made his choice. Southern force will advance. Admiral Oldendorf has spent the day preparing his ambush with meticulous care. His 6 battleships, West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania, are arranged in a line across the northern end of the strait. 5 of these vessels are Pearl Harbor survivors, raised from the mud of the harbor and rebuilt for this moment of revenge. 8 cruisers form 2 flanking columns on either side of the battleship line. Behind them, in reserve, are 28 destroyers organized into 3 squadrons. And patrolling the southern approaches are 39 PT boats, small, fast, and armed with torpedoes. It is the most one-sided setup in the history of naval warfare. The Japanese are sailing into a gauntlet from which there can be no escape. As Nishimura's warships steam north through the darkness, lookouts hear the sound of small boat engines ahead. Japanese sailors open the shutters on their searchlights and sweep the beams across the water. There, illuminated in the harsh white light, are dozens of tiny PT boats racing through the night. The Battle of Surigao Strait has begun. Lieutenant Commander Robert Leeson commands PT Boat Squadron 21, 13 small patrol torpedo boats that have been patrolling the southern approaches to Surigao Strait. At just before 11 in the evening, his radar picks up multiple large contacts steaming north at high speed. Leeson immediately radios the contact report to Admiral Oldendorf, then orders his boats to attack. The 39 PT boats split into 3 groups, slashing through the dark waters toward the Japanese formation. The Japanese warships open fire with everything they have: main batteries, secondary guns, anti-aircraft weapons. Star shells burst overhead, transforming night into day and silhouetting the tiny American boats against the illuminated water. Searchlight beams sweep back and forth, seeking targets. A PT boat captain, watching the massive battleships loom out of the darkness, radios in breathless excitement, "I've got one big one in sight. My God, there are 2 more big ones, and maybe another." Columns of water erupt around the small boats as heavy shells crash into the sea. The Japanese gunners are firing at maximum rate, but the PT boats are frustratingly difficult to hit, small, fast, and maneuvering violently through the shell splashes. 10 boats are damaged by near misses and shell fragments, but only one, PT 493, takes serious damage. A shell tears through her hull below the waterline, and she begins taking on water rapidly. Her skipper beaches the stricken boat on Panaon Island before she can sink. The PT boats press their attacks in waves, racing to within torpedo range before launching their Mark 13 torpedoes and then turning away at full throttle. These hit-and-run attacks continue for the next 3.5 hours, putting constant pressure on the Japanese formation and forcing the warships to maneuver continuously to avoid torpedoes. But despite firing dozens of torpedoes, the PT boats score no hits. The Mark 13 torpedo is notoriously unreliable, and the high-speed maneuvering of both attackers and targets makes accurate fire nearly impossible in the darkness. Yet, the PT boat attacks achieve their primary mission. They harass and distract the Japanese while continuously reporting their position, course, and speed to Admiral Oldendorf. The American battleships and destroyers now have precise information about the approaching enemy. Nishimura's formation remains intact, but his sailors are exhausted and on edge after hours of combat maneuvering under continuous attack. Worse, the need to dodge torpedoes has slowed their advance and disrupted their formation spacing. At 2:30 in the morning, on the 25th of October, Admiral Oldendorf orders his destroyers to attack. The battleships will fire their guns soon enough. First, the tin cans will have their chance. Captain Jesse Coward leads Destroyer Squadron 54 down the eastern side of Surigao Strait. 3 destroyers racing south at high speed toward the advancing Japanese formation. 2 more destroyers from his squadron hug the western shore, approaching from the opposite direction. Following close behind is Destroyer Squadron 24 under Captain Kenmore McMains, 6 destroyers in 2 columns. The Australian destroyer HMAS Arunta joins the attack, her crew eager to strike a blow against the enemy that has threatened their homeland. Bringing up the rear is Captain Roland Smoot's Destroyer Squadron 56, 9 ships deployed in 3 columns of 3. Combined, these 21 destroyers carry 144 torpedoes. They are about to unleash them all. Just before 3 in the morning, the Japanese destroyer Shigure reports 3 unidentified ships approaching rapidly from the northeast. Yamashiro's powerful searchlights train on the lead American destroyer, USS Remy, catching her in a brilliant beam of light that makes every man on deck feel exposed and vulnerable. The Japanese warships immediately open fire. Shell splashes erupt around Remy as she charges forward, her captain calling out course changes to dodge the incoming salvos. One officer will later write, "I have never been in a quieter, more tense atmosphere than existed from the moment we started down." At 3:00 in the morning, Destroyer Squadron 54 closes to within 10,000 yards, range for a torpedo attack. USS Remy, McGowan, and Melvin fire 27 Mark 15 torpedoes in rapid succession, then break off to the northeast at flank speed, laying smoke to cover their retreat. The Japanese gunners continue firing, but the destroyers are already disappearing into the darkness, their wakes churning white in the searchlight beams. On the bridges of the American ships, officers stare at their stopwatches, counting down the seconds until the torpedoes reach their targets. 8 minutes later, 2 torpedoes from USS Melvin strike the battleship Fuso amidships. The explosions tear massive holes in her hull and destroy her boiler rooms. Power fails throughout the ship, and Fuso's speed is cut nearly in half as she falls out of formation. The heavy cruiser Mogami, following close behind, nearly collides with the stricken battleship in the darkness. She swerves violently to avoid ramming Fuso's stern, throwing her own formation into disarray. 2 minutes later, at 3:20 in the morning, the destroyers McDermott and Monson fire their torpedoes, McDermott targeting the Japanese destroyer column, Monson aiming for Yamashiro. The results are catastrophic for the Japanese. The destroyer Yamagumo takes 2 direct hits and is vaporized instantly as her magazines detonate in a tremendous explosion. The blast is so violent that the ship simply disappears. One moment she is there, the next moment only burning debris remains on the surface. Of her crew of 200, only 2 men survive. The destroyer Michishou is struck by 1 torpedo that leaves her dead in the water, drifting helplessly as flooding spreads through her lower compartments. Asagumo has her bow completely blown off by a torpedo hit, but her crew manages to contain the flooding and keep the engines running. Trailing a huge oil slick, she begins limping south towards safety. One of Monson's torpedoes strikes Yamashiro on her port side near the after turret magazine. The magazine is immediately flooded to prevent an explosion that would destroy the ship, but Yamashiro's speed is cut in half, just like her sister ship Fuso. Admiral Nishimura, standing on Yamashiro's bridge, watches his formation disintegrate around him. 2 of his 4 destroyers are gone, 1 vaporized, 1 crippled. A third is severely damaged. Both his battleships have been hit and slowed. But he does not consider retreat. The mission is to reach the landing beaches, and he will continue north until his ships are destroyed or he accomplishes that mission. Behind him, unseen in the darkness, Fuso is fighting a losing battle for survival. The wounded battleship Fuso attempts to retreat south, hoping to get far enough away to conduct damage control operations. But the 2 torpedo hits have caused catastrophic flooding, and water is pouring into the breached hull faster than the pumps can remove it. 2 PT boats are shadowing her, radioing regular position reports to Admiral Oldendorf's flagship. At 3:38 in the morning, the crew of USS Pensacola, positioned 25 nautical miles to the north, witnesses an incredible sight. A tremendous explosion lights up the southern horizon, a ball of fire that rises high into the night sky, bright enough to illuminate the clouds above. Lookouts aboard the American battleships stare in awe at the distant fireball. The cause of Fuso's final explosion has never been definitively determined. Most likely, the progressive flooding reached a magazine or fuel bunker, causing a detonation that tore the battleship apart. Within 12 minutes, Fuso has disappeared beneath the surface of Surigao Strait. Of her crew of 1,630, only 10 men survive, plucked from the oil-covered water by passing destroyers. At 3:52 in the morning, Admiral Nishimura tries to radio his sister ship to check on her condition. There is no response. Fuso is gone, though Nishimura does not yet know it. He continues charging forward through the darkness, determined to complete his mission. Ahead of him, the massed guns of 6 American battleships are trained and ready, their crews waiting at battle stations for the order to fire. Aboard USS West Virginia, the fire control officers in the Combat Information Center have been tracking the approaching Japanese formation on radar for the past hour. The new Mark 8 fire control radar can track targets at ranges exceeding 40,000 yards and compute firing solutions with unprecedented accuracy. At 3:53 in the morning, the range closes to 26,000 yards, 13 nautical miles. The gunnery officer requests permission to open fire. The order is given: commence firing. West Virginia's 16-inch guns erupt in a tremendous broadside, 8 massive shells screaming toward the target at 2,600 feet per second. The battleship shudders with the recoil, as 45 seconds later, the gunnery officer reports: first salvo hit on enemy battleship. 2 minutes later, the other American battleships join in. Tennessee and Maryland with 14-inch guns, California and Pennsylvania with 14-inch guns, Mississippi with 12-inch guns. All 6 battleships firing in the darkness at a target they cannot see with their own eyes, guided only by radar. Yamashiro is immediately straddled by shells, water columns rising around her as the ocean erupts in geysers of spray. Then, the hits begin to land. A salvo from Maryland smashes into Yamashiro's distinctive pagoda mast, the massive structure that towers above her superstructure. The hit causes tremendous casualties among the personnel stationed there and sets fires that quickly spread. At the same time, the 8 American cruisers have found the range and are lobbing 8-inch and 6-inch shells at the Japanese warships. USS Boise's gunnery officer does not even pause to observe the fall of shot. He simply orders continuous rapid fire, trusting his radar operators to keep the guns on target. In just 18 minutes, the American cruisers will fire over 3,100 shells at the Japanese formation. Yamashiro is the primary target, and she is taking a tremendous pounding. The old battleship fires back with her 14-inch guns, blindly shooting into the darkness toward the flashes of American gunfire on the horizon. She manages to straddle the light cruiser USS Denver with one salvo and hits the destroyer Albert W. Grant with her secondary battery, causing significant damage and casualties. But without radar fire control, Yamashiro is at a devastating disadvantage in this night action. At 4:08 in the morning, Admiral Shima's second striking force arrives at the southern end of Surigao Strait and steams north to join the battle. Shima can see the gun flashes ahead and realizes that Nishimura is already engaged with superior American forces. On Yamashiro's bridge, Admiral Nishimura sends one final radio message to Admiral Kurita and Center Force. "We proceed till totally annihilated. I have definitely accomplished my mission as prearranged. Please rest assured." The battleship attempts to swing to port to unmask all 12 of her 14-inch guns, presenting her full broadside to the American fleet. But this maneuver only makes her a larger target. 2 more torpedoes from the destroyer squadron that has been maneuvering for a second attack slam into her hull, causing her to list heavily to port. At 4:19 in the morning, just 26 minutes after the American battleships opened fire, Yamashiro capsizes and sinks to the bottom of Surigao Strait. In a morbid coincidence, only 10 of her crew of 1,636 survive, the same number that survived from her sister ship Fuso. Captain Shinoda and Admiral Nishimura go down with their ship, as naval tradition demands. The last battleship versus battleship engagement in naval history is over. Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima, commanding the second striking force, sails into the aftermath of the slaughter. An eerie silence has fallen over Surigao Strait after Admiral Oldendorf ordered ceasefire at 4:20 in the morning. Japanese warships burn in the darkness, their hulks drifting or sinking slowly. The water is covered with oil and debris, and Japanese sailors clinging to wreckage. Shima's flagship, the heavy cruiser Nachi, prepares to launch torpedoes at the American battleships whose positions he can estimate from their gun flashes. But as Nachi maneuvers to attack, her captain spots the burning hulk of the heavy cruiser Mogami dead ahead in the darkness. Mogami appears to be dead in the water, and Nachi's navigator calculates an approach to pass ahead of her. But Mogami is actually still making 8 knots, limping north despite her damage. The navigator's calculations are fatally wrong. At 4:30 in the morning, the 2 heavy cruisers collide in the darkness. Nachi's bow crumples and begins flooding. Sparks from the collision ignite fires on Mogami's deck, and within moments the flames reach her stored torpedoes. The torpedoes detonate in a series of explosions that destroy Mogami's starboard engine. She can now make only 4 knots, too slow to escape the approaching American pursuit force. Aboard Nachi, Admiral Shima scans the waters ahead with his binoculars. He attempts to raise Admiral Nishimura on the radio, but receives no reply. Yamashiro and Fuso are nowhere to be seen. Only burning wrecks and dead ships remain. Shima makes the decision to retreat. He will later write in his after-action report, "If we continued dashing further north, it was quite clear that we should only fall into a ready trap." He orders his force to turn south and withdraw from Surigao Strait at maximum speed. Admiral Oldendorf, watching the radar screen aboard his flagship Louisville, notices the surviving Japanese warships retiring southward. He immediately orders a pursuit force of cruisers and destroyers to give chase. The cruisers, Louisville, Portland, and Denver, along with several destroyers, race south through waters littered with Japanese survivors and burning oil slicks. A gunnery officer aboard the destroyer USS Benyon will later write, "I counted 8 distinct fires, and the oily surface of the Gulf was littered with debris and groups of Japanese sailors clinging to bits of wreckage and calling out to us as we raced past." After 45 minutes of pursuit, the American cruisers catch up with the crippled Mogami and the destroyer Asagumo, which has been rescuing survivors from Fuso. The American ships open fire at 5:30 in the morning. Between 5:30 and 5:35, Mogami takes more than 10 direct hits from 6-inch and 8-inch shells. But incredibly, she refuses to sink. Her commander makes a sharp course change that throws off the American pursuit, and the cruisers decide not to chase her further into the confined waters to the south. 3 hours later, Mogami's port engines break down, leaving her dead in the water. American aircraft attack and bomb her repeatedly throughout the morning. At 10:47, with fires raging and no hope of salvation, her commanding officer orders her scuttled. The destroyer Asagumo meets a similar fate. While still recovering Fuso survivors, she is attacked by a squadron of PT boats that speed in for a hit-and-run torpedo strike. At 6:30 in the morning, a torpedo from PT-323 strikes Asagumo amidships, leaving her drifting. Within half an hour, the light cruisers, Denver and Columbia, along with 3 destroyers, come across the helpless Asagumo. She opens fire with her 5-inch guns, but the outcome is never in doubt. By 7:21 in the morning, Asagumo slips beneath the surface, her bow already awash, her guns still firing until the moment she sinks. Of the 7 warships that composed Admiral Nishimura's southern force, only the destroyer Shigure survives the Battle of Surigao Strait. The southern prong of Operation Shogo 1 has been utterly annihilated. As dawn breaks over Surigao Strait on the morning of October 25th, the scale of the Japanese disaster becomes apparent. 2 battleships sunk, Fuso and Yamashiro. 1 heavy cruiser sunk, Mogami. 3 destroyers destroyed, Yamagumo, Michishio, and Asagumo. Only 1 destroyer, Shigure, has escaped the trap. Japanese casualties are catastrophic, over 3,500 sailors killed. Hundreds more float in the oil-covered waters, many refusing to be rescued by American ships, preferring death to capture. Those who do swim to shore often meet an even grimmer fate. Filipino guerrillas, seeking revenge for 3 years of brutal Japanese occupation, hunt down the survivors with bolo knives. Few Japanese sailors who reach land will survive the week. American casualties are remarkably light, 39 men killed and 144 wounded. PT Boat 493 and the destroyer Albert W. Grant are the only U.S. Navy vessels seriously damaged. For the 5 Pearl Harbor survivors among the American battleships, this victory carries special meaning. West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania have repaid the Japanese for the surprise attack that nearly destroyed them 3 years earlier. Admiral Oldendorf's victory is total and unequivocal, a textbook example of naval tactics executed to perfection. By crossing the T and using radar fire control, he has achieved what battleship admirals had dreamed of for centuries, a one-sided engagement in which superior position and firepower decide the outcome without loss to one's own fleet. It is also the end of an era. Never again will battleships face each other in combat, their massive guns deciding the fate of empires. The age of the battleship has passed, giving way to the age of the aircraft carrier. But 250 miles to the north, off the island of Samar, the men of Taffy 3 are about to discover that the age of the battleship is not quite over. The most desperate naval battle in American history is about to begin. It is 5:45 in the morning on the 25th of October, 1944. Ensign Bill Brooks launches his TBM Avenger torpedo bomber from the flight deck of the escort carrier USS Street Low. His mission is routine, an anti-submarine patrol off the eastern coast of Samar Island in the Philippines. Brooks is part of Task Unit Taffy 3, a small formation of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts, providing close air support for General MacArthur's invasion forces on Leyte. The 13 ships of Taffy 3 are not designed for fleet combat. They are intended to escort convoys, conduct reconnaissance patrols, and provide air cover for troops fighting on shore. 3 more Avengers and 2 older Wildcat fighters fan out to the northwest, searching for Japanese submarines that might threaten the invasion fleet. But thick cloud cover prevents Brooks from observing the water surface below. For the next 45 minutes, he flies through the overcast, seeing nothing but grey clouds in every direction. It is monotonous work, the kind of patrol that lulls aviators into complacency. At just after 6:30 in the morning, Brooks finally spots a break in the cloud layer. He pushes his control stick forward and dives through the opening to 4,000 feet, eager to get a clear look at the ocean surface. What he sees below makes no sense at first. Large warships, many of them, steaming in formation toward the southeast. Their wakes cut white lines across the blue-grey water. Brooks can see battleships, their distinctive superstructures unmistakable even from this altitude. He turns to his turret gunner and remarks casually, "Hey, look at that. Halsey must have come down from the north." His gunner replies, "Thank God they're on our side." But as Brooks studies the formation more carefully, a nagging doubt begins to grow in his mind. There are no aircraft carriers among these vessels, and Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet is built around its fast carriers. More importantly, none of these ships match the profiles he has memorized during months of aircraft recognition training. The battleships look wrong. The cruisers look wrong. Even the destroyers have an unfamiliar silhouette. Brooks drops lower, his heart beginning to race as the horrible possibility becomes a certainty. Anti-aircraft fire suddenly erupts around his Avenger, black puffs of flak exploding in the air, tracers arcing up toward him in graceful, deadly curves. He banks hard and climbs, his mind racing as fast as his aircraft. These are not American ships. These are not friendly forces. This is a Japanese fleet, and it is heading directly toward Taffy 3. Brooks gets on his radio, his voice urgent but controlled. Derby Base, enemy surface force of 4 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 10 to 12 destroyers, sighted 20 miles northwest of your task group and closing in on you at 30 knots. He repeats the message twice to ensure it is received, then continues circling at a safe distance from the enemy's anti-aircraft fire, watching in disbelief as the massive Japanese formation steams steadily toward the small, vulnerable ships of Taffy 3. The message is picked up by Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague aboard his flagship, the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay. Sprague's initial reaction is annoyance. He assumes this is an inexperienced pilot who has misidentified friendly ships, probably elements of Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet returning from operations to the north. He calls down to Fanshawe Bay's Combat Information Center, Airplot, tell him to check his identification. But Brooks is certain of what he sees. He drops to just 2,000 feet above the Japanese fleet, close enough to photograph the massive warships with his handheld camera. Anti-aircraft fire intensifies around him, shells bursting so close that shrapnel rattles against his fuselage. He keys his radio again, his voice emphatic. "I see the pagoda masts. I see the biggest red meatball flag I ever saw, flying on the biggest battleship I ever saw." On Fanshawe Bay, radio operators begin picking up Japanese voice transmissions on naval frequencies. Lookouts report distant flak bursts on the northwestern horizon, visible evidence of Brooks's encounter with anti-aircraft fire. Admiral Sprague stares at the horizon, his mind refusing to accept what the evidence is telling him. Then he sees them, the tops of pagoda masts rising above the curve of the earth, growing steadily taller as the ships race toward Taffy 3 at high speed. The realization hits him like a physical blow. This is real. This is happening. The most powerful Japanese surface fleet ever assembled is bearing down on his tiny task unit, and there is nowhere to run. Admiral Clifton Sprague is a capable officer who has commanded escort carriers for over a year, but nothing in his experience has prepared him for this moment. He quickly takes stock of his forces and realizes just how hopeless his situation is. Taffy 3 consists of 6 small escort carriers: Fanshawe Bay, Streetlow, White Plains, Callinan Bay, Kitcoon Bay, and Gambia Bay. These are not the fast fleet carriers of Task Force 38. They are converted merchant hulls, lightly armoured, capable of only 18 knots maximum speed, and armed with a single 5-inch gun each. Weapons intended to drive off surfaced submarines, not engage battleships. His 3 destroyers, Johnston, Howell, and Heermann, are Fletcher-class vessels, each armed with 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. His 4 destroyer escorts, Samuel B. Roberts, Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond, are even smaller, carrying only 2 5-inch guns and 3 torpedo tubes each. Against this, Admiral Kurita's center force fields 4 battleships: Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna. 6 heavy cruisers: Haguro, Tone, Chikuma, Kumano, Suzuya, and Chikuma. 2 light cruisers, Noshiro and Yahagi, and 11 destroyers. The super battleship Yamato alone displaces nearly 70,000 tons, almost as much as the combined weight of every ship in Taffy 3. Her 9 18.1-inch guns can hurl 3,200-pound shells over 25 miles with devastating accuracy. Sprague's carriers have approximately 150 aircraft between them, but these planes are armed for ground support missions and anti-submarine warfare. Their bomb loads consist of high-explosive bombs, effective against troops and buildings, and depth charges designed to crack submarine pressure hulls. Against battleship armor plate measuring up to 16 inches thick, these weapons will be largely ineffective. The mathematics of the situation are brutally simple. Taffy 3 is outnumbered, outgunned, and out-armoured by a margin that makes survival seem impossible. But Admiral Sprague is not a man who gives up easily. He has one advantage: time. If he can keep his carriers alive long enough, help might arrive from the south, where Admiral Kincaid's 7th Fleet battleships finished destroying the Japanese southern force just hours earlier. At 6:50 in the morning, Sprague issues a flurry of orders. All carriers are to turn into the wind immediately and launch every aircraft they can get airborne. The destroyers and destroyer escorts are to lay smoke screens and zigzag between the carriers and the enemy to shield the vulnerable escort carriers from view. He also sends an urgent plain language radio message to Admiral Kincaid and all Allied forces in the area. Enemy surface force attacking. Request immediate assistance. As the carriers swing into the wind to launch aircraft, their flight deck crews work with desperate speed. Pilots sprint to their planes without full briefings. Ordnancemen load whatever weapons are immediately available. Some aircraft receive a few bombs or rockets. Others launch with nothing but their machine guns and whatever ammunition is already loaded. Many pilots will take off completely unarmed, with orders to make dummy attack runs to distract the Japanese gunners and force enemy ships to maneuver. At 6:59 in the morning, just 14 minutes after Ensign Brooks first spotted the Japanese fleet, Yamato opens fire. Her forward turrets erupt in flame and smoke as 6 18.1-inch shells arc toward the escort carrier, White Plains, at a range of nearly 20 miles. The shells take 45 seconds to traverse the distance, screaming through the air like freight trains before crashing into the ocean around White Plains in massive geysers of coloured water. The Japanese used dye packets in their shells, different colours for different ships, allowing their spotters to identify which salvos belong to which vessel when multiple ships are firing at the same target. Red geysers, green geysers, yellow and blue geysers erupt around the American carriers as more Japanese battleships and cruisers join the bombardment. The Battle of Samar has begun. Against all odds, against all reason, Taffy 3 is going to fight. The destroyer USS Johnston is steaming at the rear of Taffy 3's formation when the Japanese shells begin falling. Her commanding officer, Commander Ernest E. Evans, is a Creek Native American from Oklahoma who graduated from the Naval Academy in 1931 and has spent 13 years working his way up through the ranks. At Johnston's commissioning ceremony in October 1943, Evans addressed his crew with words that defined his philosophy of command. "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to come along had better get off right now." Now, watching the coloured shell splashes erupt around the escort carriers, Evans makes a decision without waiting for orders from Admiral Sprague. Johnston is a warship, and her duty is to fight. He picks up the intercom microphone and addresses his crew. "All hands to General Quarters. Prepare to attack major portion of the Japanese fleet. All engines ahead, flank. Commence making smoke. Stand by for a torpedo attack. Left full rudder." Johnston heels hard to port as she comes about, her 4 boilers straining to produce maximum power. Black smoke pours from her stacks as the engineers bring her up to 35 knots, flank speed, and then some. She lays a thick smoke screen as she charges directly at the Japanese fleet, a single destroyer racing alone toward 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and supporting vessels. It is 7:00 in the morning. The odds are roughly 50-1. Evans is not ignorant of the odds, but he has calculated that Johnston's only chance, and Taffy 3's only chance, is to attack aggressively and disrupt the Japanese formation before the enemy battleships can close to point-blank range of the streak. Carriers. Johnston charges through a gauntlet of coloured shell splashes, red, green, yellow, blue. The Japanese gunners trying to find the range on this audacious destroyer. Evans employs a tactic called chasing salvos, deliberately steering toward the spot where shells have just landed, gambling that the Japanese gunners will not fire at the same point twice in succession. For now, the tactic works. Johnston twists and turns through the shell splashes, her wake tracing a serpentine path across the water. At 7:10 in the morning, she closes to within 18,000 yards of the lead Japanese heavy cruiser, Kumano, flagship of Cruiser Division 7. This is range for Johnston's 5-inch guns, and Evans gives the order to open fire. Johnston's Mark 37 Fire Control Director, one of the most advanced systems in the US Navy, locks onto Kumano and begins feeding targeting data to the gun mounts. All 4 5-inch guns begin firing in rapid succession, their barrels flashing as they hurl 54-pound shells toward the Japanese cruiser at 2,600 feet per second. The rate of fire is tremendous, nearly 80 shells per minute pouring toward Kumano from a range where the 5-inch guns retain enough velocity to penetrate the cruiser's thin superstructure armor. Within minutes, Johnston has scored over 40 hits on Kumano. The shells are not large enough to sink the heavy cruiser, but they tear through her upper works, starting fires and causing heavy casualties among the exposed anti-aircraft crews and bridge personnel. Kumano's superstructure is transformed into a blazing wreck. Incredibly, Kumano fails to return effective fire on Johnston. Her main battery turrets train on the charging destroyer, but cannot seem to find the range, their shells falling wide or short. Evans continues closing the distance, racing through the shell splashes at maximum speed. At 7:18 in the morning, Johnston reaches 10,000 yards, torpedo range. The torpedo officer has been tracking Kumano's course and speed, feeding data into the mechanical computer that calculates the proper aim point for the Mark 15 torpedoes. Evans gives the order, "Fire torpedoes." All 10 torpedo tubes fire in rapid succession, their pneumatic launchers hurling the 24-foot-long torpedoes into the water. Each Mark 15 carries a 643-pound warhead and runs at 46 knots, fast enough to cross the 10,000-yard distance in just over 4 minutes. Evans immediately orders hard left rudder, swinging Johnston onto a reciprocal course to race back toward Taffy 3. He has done what he came to do. He has bloodied the enemy, launched his torpedoes, and now he must escape before the full weight of Center Force's guns crushes his ship. As Johnston turns away, her crew counts down the seconds until the torpedoes reach their target. 45 seconds after Johnston completes her turn, they feel the ship shudder slightly, not from anything that has struck Johnston, but from a massive underwater explosion 4 miles away. One of Johnston's torpedoes has struck Kumano directly on the bow, and the explosion tears the entire forward section off the heavy cruiser. Kumano slews to starboard, her speed dropping rapidly as water floods into the gaping wound. She falls out of formation, dead in the water, with 2 destroyers detached to stand by her. The flagship of the Japanese cruiser division has been knocked out of the battle by a single American destroyer. But Johnston's luck is about to run out. At 7:25 in the morning, just 1 minute after scoring her torpedo hit, Johnston is struck by 3 18.1-inch shells from Yamato's main battery, fired from a range of over 10 miles. The massive shells, each weighing over 3,000 pounds, strike Johnston like the fist of an angry god. One shell tears through the after engine room, destroying the propeller gears and main steam turbine. Another penetrates a boiler room, causing a catastrophic loss of steam pressure. The third smashes into the bridge area, killing several officers and wounding many more. 3 6-inch shells from Yamato's secondary battery follow immediately, one of which detonates on the bridge itself. Commander Evans is peppered with shrapnel, losing 2 fingers from his left hand. He refuses medical attention, wrapping his bleeding hand in a handkerchief and continuing to command his ship. Johnston's superstructure is wrecked, her speed cut from 35 knots to barely 17. Fires burn throughout the ship, though the lack of fuel oil on board, she had launched that morning with tanks less than half full, prevents the fires from spreading catastrophically. Limping and burning, Johnston heads for the nearest rain squall to hide and conduct emergency repairs. As she enters the curtain of rain, her crew watches 3 more American destroyers and a destroyer escort racing past her in the opposite direction, heading toward the Japanese fleet to make their own torpedo attack. Evans watches them go and makes a decision. His ship is badly damaged, operating on one engine, with no torpedoes left. But she still has her guns, and her crew is still ready to fight. He turns to the officers on the bridge and says simply, "We'll go in with the destroyers and provide fire support." Johnston turns around and, impossibly, heads back toward the enemy fleet for a second attack. At 7:16 in the morning, Admiral Sprague transmits an order to his screening force. Small boys attack with torpedoes. Commander William Thomas aboard the destroyer Hoel acknowledges immediately and increases speed, leading his vessel and the destroyer Heermann toward the Japanese cruiser line. These 2 destroyers will make the first organized torpedo attack against center force. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts receives the same transmission. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, radios Commander Thomas, "Do you want the little fellows to go with the big little fellows?" Thomas replies curtly, "Your last transmission, negative." Samuel B. Roberts, at only 1,400 tons displacement, is not technically a small boy in naval parlance. She is a small boy, less than half the size of a Fletcher-class destroyer. Commander Thomas is telling her to stay back with the carriers where she belongs. Lieutenant Commander Copeland looks around at his ship's position in the formation and realizes that Samuel B. Roberts is actually better positioned than the larger destroyers for an immediate attack. He also knows that Admiral Sprague's order did not specify which ships should attack. He said small boys, and Samuel B. Roberts is definitely a small boy. Copeland makes his decision without waiting for further orders. He picks up the ship's intercom microphone and addresses his crew. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can. Then, he calls down to the engine room. "This is the captain. We are going on a torpedo attack, and I have rung up full speed. I want you to hook on everything you've got." Chief Engineer Lieutenant Bill Trowbridge looks at the steam pressure gauges and makes his own decision. He orders the boiler tenders to shut off the safety valves that prevent the boilers from exceeding their designed operating pressure. Samuel B. Roberts surges forward, her small hull vibrating as her turbines spin up to speeds they were never designed to sustain. She achieves 29 knots, 5 knots above her rated maximum speed, as she races to join Hoel and Heermann. The 3 American warships charge toward the Japanese cruiser line through a storm of shell fire. Hoel is in the lead, her captain, Commander Leon Kinberger, calmly calling out rudder orders to chase salvos and avoid the coloured shell splashes erupting around his ship. His communications officer will later marvel at Kinberger's unflappable demeanour. Right, full rudder. Steady up now. Left, full rudder. Give it all you've got. The orders come in a calm, measured voice despite the fact that death is falling from the sky all around them. At 7:25 in the morning, Hoel's luck runs out. A 6-inch shell from Yamato's secondary battery strikes her bridge, killing 4 men and wounding Captain Kinberger. The fire control radar is knocked out, forcing the gun crews to aim and fire by optical sights alone. But Hoel presses on despite the damage, closing to within 7,000 yards of the battleship Congo before launching 5 torpedoes. The torpedoes miss as Congo turns away, but Howell has forced the battleship to break off her bombardment of the carriers and maneuver defensively. As Howell emerges from a rain squall after launching her first salvo of torpedoes, she finds herself facing 4 Japanese battleships, Congo, Haruna, Nagato, and Yamato, all within gun range and all turning their attention toward her. Captain Kinberger, bleeding from his wounds, attacks anyway. Howell opens fire with her 5-inch guns on the battleship Haruna, scoring several hits that start fires on the massive ship's superstructure. She closes to within 5,000 yards, point-blank range, and launches her remaining 5 torpedoes. 4 of these torpedoes track directly toward Yamato. Lookouts on the super battleship's bridge spot them coming and shout warnings. Yamato's captain orders emergency left rudder, turning the massive ship to present her narrow bow to the torpedoes rather than her broad beam. The torpedoes pass harmlessly down Yamato's port side, missing by yards. But the super battleship has been forced to turn completely away from the carriers and steam north for several minutes to evade the attack. At the critical moment of the battle, when her 18.1-inch guns could be pounding the American carriers, Yamato is instead running from torpedoes launched by a destroyer less than 1/20th her tonnage. It is an improbable tactical victory that buys precious minutes for Taffy 3. Meanwhile, the destroyer Heermann is making her own attack run. She closes to 9,000 yards of the Japanese cruiser line and launches 5 torpedoes, then swings to port to bring her stern tubes to bear. In the confusion, her torpedo officer accidentally fires 2 extra torpedoes, along with the planned 3 from the stern tubes, launching 7 torpedoes total at the heavy cruiser Haguro. As Heermann enters a rain squall for cover, she emerges almost immediately to find herself facing the same 4 battleships that are engaging Howell. Chief Yeoman Harold Whitney, watching from his station, assumes his ship is about to be blown out of the water. But Captain Amos Hathaway does not hesitate. He attacks the battleship Haruna head-on, his 5-inch guns firing as fast as the crews can load them. American pilots flying overhead will later describe the surreal sight of the small destroyer trading salvos with the 37,000-ton battleship, and the even more surreal fact that Haruna cannot seem to hit the elusive American ship. Heermann scores multiple hits on Haruna's superstructure, starting fires and causing casualties. When she closes to torpedo range, she launches her remaining 3 torpedoes before turning away at flank speed, laying smoke to cover her retreat. The torpedoes miss, but like Howell's attack on Yamato, they force Haruna to turn away from the carriers and maneuver defensively for several critical minutes. And then there is Samuel B. Roberts. The tiny destroyer Escort has only 3 torpedo tubes, a fraction of what the larger destroyers carry. Lieutenant Commander Copeland is determined to make them count. Samuel B. Roberts races through the smoke and rain, using every scrap of concealment available to close the range without being detected. Her small silhouette and the drifting smoke screens make her nearly invisible to the Japanese lookouts. Copeland closes to 13,000 yards before his gunnery officer, Lieutenant Bill Burton, requests permission to open fire. "Captain, may I open fire?" "Not yet." Samuel B. Roberts continues closing the range. Burton asks again, "Captain, may I open fire?" "Not yet." The destroyer Escort is now at 10,000 yards. Burton asks a third time. Copeland, concentrating on maneuvering through the shell splashes and smoke, snaps back, "God damn it, Mr. Burton, I'll let you know when we may open fire." At 6,000 yards, an errant shell smashes into Samuel B. Roberts' radio mast, which topples over and jams the torpedo tubes in place. Executive Officer Bob Roberts abandons the fire control computer and does a quick mental calculation, then shouts the targeting information directly to the chief torpedo man. At 4,000 yards, less than 2 miles, Samuel B. Roberts fires her 3 torpedoes directly at the Japanese cruiser line and immediately turns to rejoin the formation. She has just executed one of the closest torpedo attacks in naval history, and somehow she is still afloat. While the destroyers and destroyer escorts charge toward the Japanese fleet, the escort carriers of Taffy 3 are locked in a desperate fight for survival. They are running east at their maximum speed of 18 knots, painfully slow compared to the Japanese battleships and cruisers that can make 30 knots, and every minute brings the enemy closer. At 7:50 in the morning, the escort carrier Callinan Bay takes the first direct hit of the battle. A 14 or 16-inch armor-piercing shell from one of the Japanese battleships penetrates her hangar deck aft of the forward elevator. The shell passes completely through the lightly armored carrier, exploding as it exits the far side. 10 minutes later, Callinan Bay finds herself in a duel with the heavy cruisers Tone and Haguro. Her single 5-inch gun, designed for anti-aircraft and anti-submarine work, fires back gamely at the massive cruisers closing from astern. At 8:25 in the morning, Callinan Bay scores 2 direct hits on Haguro with her popgun, forcing the cruiser to temporarily withdraw with fires burning on her superstructure. But the Japanese return fire is devastating. Over the next hour, Callinan Bay will take 15 shell hits from 8-inch and 6-inch guns. Incredibly, she survives. The armor-piercing shells designed to penetrate battleship armor simply punch through her thin hull plating like bullets through paper, exploding outside the ship or failing to detonate at all. Had the Japanese loaded high-explosive shells designed for use against lightly armored targets, Callinan Bay would have been blown apart. USS White Plains is hit by an 8-inch shell at the same time, but the round passes clean through the carrier without exploding. The damage causes black smoke to pour from her funnel, which leads Japanese spotters to believe she has been mortally wounded. Centerforce shifts its fire to other targets, allowing White Plains to escape further damage. A gunnery officer aboard White Plains, watching the Japanese cruisers close the range, jokes darkly over the intercom. "Just hold on a little longer, boys. We're sucking them into 40mm range." But the situation is becoming critical for all the carriers. Admiral Sprague makes a crucial decision at 7:45 in the morning. His current course is taking the carriers east, directly away from the Japanese fleet, but it is also taking them further from the American forces in Leyte Gulf, who might come to their aid. He orders a turn to the south, gambling that this course will bring them closer to Admiral Kinkaid's 7th Fleet battleships. It is a risky move. If the Japanese react quickly enough, they can cut off Taffy 3 and annihilate the formation. As the carriers turn south, they are still mostly concealed by the smoke screens laid by the destroyers and destroyer escorts. Rain squalls drifting across the battlefield provide additional cover. But the escort carrier Gambier Bay finds herself exposed on the port flank of the formation, fully visible to the Japanese cruisers. The heavy cruiser Chikuma begins shelling Gambier Bay at 8:10 in the morning. For the next 90 minutes, the small carrier is pounded relentlessly by 8-inch shells. At 8:20, a direct hit floods her forward engine room, reducing her speed from 18 knots to 11. Gambier Bay falls further behind the formation with each passing minute, making her an even easier target. At this critical moment, USS Samuel B. Roberts emerges from her torpedo attack run and spots Chikuma systematically destroying Gambier Bay. Lieutenant Commander Copeland turns to his gunnery officer and finally gives the order Bill Burton has been waiting to hear. "Mr. Burton, you may open fire." Samuel B. Roberts' two 5-inch guns erupt, and for the next 35 minutes, the tiny destroyer escort duels with the heavy cruiser. Her Mark 37 fire control director locks onto Chikuma and begins feeding targeting data to the gun mounts. Shell after shell slams into Chikuma's superstructure, starting fires and causing casualties. The destroyer escort fires so rapidly that she nearly exhausts all 600 rounds of 5-inch ammunition aboard. Her gun barrels glow red from the sustained firing, the paint on the barrels burned completely away. Chikuma returns fire, but cannot hit the nimble Samuel B. Roberts, which skillfully dodges the incoming salvos. For more than half an hour, the impossible duel continues. Meanwhile, USS Heermann has spotted Chikuma's assault on Gambier Bay and races to intervene. She cuts across Taffy 3's formation, nearly colliding with the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay, then clears the burning Gambier Bay and opens fire on Chikuma from a different angle. Heermann's 5-inch guns strike Chikuma more than 50 times. One salvo hits the cruiser's seaplane hangar, triggering a large explosion that sends flames shooting high into the air. Chikuma, already damaged by Samuel B. Roberts and now taking punishment from Heermann, begins to slow. To the north, USS Johnston, still operating on one engine, still damaged from Yamato's shells, still commanded by the bleeding and wounded Commander Evans, has spotted a new threat. 4 Japanese destroyers, led by the light cruiser Yahagi, are attempting to flank Taffy 3 from the east, positioning themselves to launch their deadly long lance torpedoes at the carriers. These destroyers have been largely out of the fight since Admiral Kurita ordered them to the rear of the formation earlier in the battle, concerned they would burn too much fuel chasing the American carriers. Now they are back, and they pose a mortal threat to the escort carriers. Evans, watching through binoculars from Johnston's wrecked bridge, makes his decision. His ship has no torpedoes left. She can barely make 17 knots on one engine. Her superstructure is a smoking ruin. But she still has her guns. For the 3rd time this morning, Johnston charges at superior enemy forces. Her 5-inch guns open fire on the light cruiser Yahagi, and the incredible happens. Johnston scores 12 direct hits on Yahagi, starting fires and causing damage. Yahagi turns 90 degrees to starboard and launches her torpedoes at extreme range before retreating. The destroyer following her takes hits from Johnston and withdraws as well. The entire Japanese destroyer column falls back out of range, launching their torpedoes ineffectively from too far away. American aircraft strafe the torpedoes in the water, destroying many of them. Anti-aircraft gunners aboard the carriers shoot at torpedoes visible in the clear water. None of the Japanese torpedoes find their targets. On Johnston's bridge, Commander Evans can hardly believe what has just happened. His gunnery officer, Lieutenant Bob Hagan, will later recall, "Commander Evans, feeling like the skipper of a battleship, was so elated he could hardly talk. He strutted across his bridge and chuckled, 'Now I've seen everything.' But the ordeal is far from over. At 8:51 in the morning, the battleship Congo fires a 14-inch salvo at Samuel B. Roberts. Several shells strike near the destroyer escort, and Captain Copeland orders emergency full reverse, essentially slamming on the brakes. Samuel B. Roberts, comes to a near halt just as another salvo of 14-inch shells crash into the water, exactly where she would have been. But stopping in the middle of a battle is fatal. At 8:51, an 8-inch shell from one of the Japanese heavy cruisers strikes Samuel B. Roberts amidships, destroying one of her boilers and reducing her speed from 28 knots to 17. The Japanese fleet pounces on the slowed destroyer escort. Shell after shell slams into her hull as she struggles to escape. In the aft 5-inch gun mount, the crew has been firing continuously for over an hour. The gun barrel is glowing bright red, the paint completely burned away, the metal heated to temperatures approaching its melting point. As they shove the second-to-last round into the breech, the red-hot barrel prematurely detonates the shell. The explosion kills or wounds everyone in the gun mount except for gunner's mate 3rd Class Paul Henry Carr. Machinist's mate 2nd Class Charles Cohen rushes into the gun mount to find Carr grievously wounded, his abdomen torn open by shrapnel. But Carr is still conscious, and he is cradling the last shell in his arms, begging Cohen to help him load it so the gun can fire one more time. Cohen tries to take the shell from Carr's arms, but each time he does, Carr crawls over and picks it up again, determined to fire that last round. Finally, Cohen is able to pull the dying man out of the gun mount. Carr dies of his wounds moments later. He will be posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his courage. At 9:00 in the morning, a 14-inch salvo from Congo strikes Samuel B. Roberts directly, leaving her dead in the water and sinking. Captain Copeland orders the crew to abandon ship over the intercom. Abandon ship. Well done. At 10:07 in the morning, Samuel B. Roberts slips beneath the surface. 90 men of her crew of 210 are lost. The heavy cruiser Chokai, which has been under continuous air attack all morning, is struck at 8:51 by a 500-pound bomb from a lone Avenger torpedo bomber. The bomb penetrates her forward machinery room and explodes, leaving her dead in the water and burning from bow to stern. She will be scuttled later in the day by the destroyer Fujinami, which picks up survivors. Fujinami herself will be sunk 2 days later. Of the 773 men aboard Chokai, none will survive the Battle of Leyte Gulf. At 8:53 in the morning, 4 torpedo-armed Avengers from the escort carrier Manila Bay in Taffy, 2 approach Chikuma from head-on. They split into an anvil formation, 2 attacking from each side, boxing in the cruiser, so she cannot evade both groups. 1 torpedo strikes Chikuma directly, blowing her bow completely off and destroying her rudder. Her speed drops to 9 knots, and she becomes uncontrollable, circling helplessly. Later airstrikes will add 3 more torpedoes to her damage. At 2:00 in the afternoon, Chikuma sinks. Her survivors are picked up by the destroyer Nowaki, which is itself sunk on October 26th. Only 1 man of Chikuma's crew of 874 survives the battle. USS Hole, which has been bracketed by fire from 3 sides since launching her torpedoes, finally succumbs to her wounds at 8:55 in the morning. Fires are burning out of control throughout the ship, and Captain Kinberger orders the crew to abandon ship. With electrical power destroyed, Kinberger personally passes the word to abandon ship, going from compartment to compartment. 20 minutes later, Hoel rolls over and sinks. 253 men are lost, 86 survive. Gambier Bay, pounded beyond endurance after 90 minutes of continuous shelling, capsizes at 9:07 in the morning. 4 minutes later, she slips completely beneath the surface, the only United States aircraft carrier in history to be sunk by enemy surface gunfire. 147 men are killed, 800 are eventually rescued. And then, miraculously, the Japanese fleet begins to turn away. But USS Johnston's fight is not over. At 9:40 in the morning, with the Japanese already beginning their withdrawal, one final salvo strikes Johnston and knocks out her last remaining engine. She is dead in the water, drifting helplessly. At 9:45, Commander Evans gives the order to abandon ship. The crew begins leaping into the oil-covered water as the Japanese destroyer Yukikaze steams past Johnston's starboard side. The American sailors in the water expect to be machine-gunned. Instead, the crew of Yukikaze stands at attention on deck while their captain salutes from the bridge. One survivor will later say, "I'm sure of one thing, she appreciated a fighting lady." At 10:10 in the morning, USS Johnston sinks beneath the waves. 186 men are lost with her. Commander Ernest E. Evans was last seen on deck, preparing to abandon ship. When a sailor looked again, he was gone. His body was never recovered. He will be posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the first Native American in the United States Navy to receive the nation's highest award for valor. At 9:00 in the morning, just as USS Gambier Bay capsizes and sinks, the impossible happens. The Japanese fleet, which has been relentlessly pursuing and hammering Taffy 3 for over 2 hours, begins turning away to the north, breaking off the attack. Admiral Clifton Sprague, watching from Fanshawe Bay's bridge through binoculars, cannot believe what he is seeing. The massive Japanese battleships and cruisers are turning their sterns to the American carriers and steaming away at high speed. Sprague will later write, "I could not get the facts to soak into my blood-numbed brain. At best, I had expected to be swimming by this time." On the bridge of Fanshawe Bay, a signalman shouts in frustration, "God damn it, boys, they're getting away!" What has happened aboard Yamato to cause this sudden retreat? Admiral Kurita has lost control of the battle. From his position on Yamato's bridge, Kurita cannot see the complete picture of the engagement. His fleet has become scattered across miles of ocean, with different formations pursuing different targets through smoke screens and rain squalls. Some of his ships are heading north, some east, some south. There is no coordinated attack, only individual actions by ships that have lost visual contact with each other. He has received conflicting reports about enemy strength. Some officers report sinking multiple carriers and cruisers. Others report many more American ships still afloat. The truth is obscured by smoke, confusion, and wishful thinking. The constant attacks by American aircraft, even those flying without weapons, making dummy runs to force his ships to maneuver, have convinced Kurita that he faces a much larger force than he actually does. He believes he has been engaging fleet carriers of Task Force 38, not the small escort carriers of Taffy 3. 3 of his heavy cruisers have been sunk or crippled: Kumano, Chokai, and Chikuma. His cruiser division has been shattered by the attacks of destroyers and destroyer escorts that should have been swatted aside like insects. Most importantly, Kurita believes the American carriers are now out of reach. The smoke screens and evasive maneuvering have opened the range to over 20,000 yards, and the carriers are fleeing at maximum speed toward what Kurita assumes is the protection of Admiral Halsey's battleships. He makes his decision. At 9:20 in the morning, he signals to all ships, "All ships, my course north, speed 20. The threat to the American landing beaches on Leyte is over. Operation Shogo 1 has failed. Taffy 3 has survived against impossible odds. 6 small escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts have turned away the most powerful Japanese surface fleet ever assembled: 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The cost has been terrible. Approximately 2,000 US Navy sailors and airmen have been killed or are missing. 2 destroyers, Johnston and Howell, have been sunk. 1 destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts, has been lost. 1 escort carrier, Gambier Bay, has been sent to the bottom. Nearly every ship in Taffy 3 has been damaged to some degree. Callanine Bay alone has taken 15 shell hits but remains afloat. As the Japanese fleet disappears over the northern horizon, aircraft from Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3 pursue them, harassing the retreating warships with bombs, rockets, and strafing runs. Admiral Sprague watches them go, still unable to fully process what has just happened. His tiny task unit, outgunned, outnumbered, and out-armoured by margins that made defeat seem certain, has somehow survived. Only task may, in the races have said. But the ordeal is not quite over. A new and even more terrifying threat is approaching, one that will introduce a horrifying new dimension to the Pacific War. At 10:50 in the morning, an hour and a half after the Japanese surface fleet withdrew, the sailors of Taffy 3 are beginning to believe they might actually survive this day. Damage control parties are fighting fires and patching holes. The carriers are recovering aircraft that have been circling overhead, waiting to land. Then the radar operators pick up a new formation of aircraft, approaching from the west, Japanese bombers from airfields on Leyte and Negros Islands. Combat air patrol fighters are vectored to intercept, but several aircraft break through the defensive screen. These are not ordinary bombing attacks. These pilots have no intention of releasing their bombs and turning away. They are the first organized kamikaze attack of the Pacific War, suicide pilots who will deliberately crash their aircraft into American ships, turning themselves and their planes into guided missiles. At 10:51 in the morning, a Zero fighter loaded with a 250-kilogram bomb dives toward the escort carrier Street Low. Anti-aircraft fire from the carrier and surrounding ships fills the sky, but the Zero keeps coming, trailing smoke from multiple hits. The aircraft crashes directly into Street Low's flight deck, penetrating to the hangar bay where aircraft are being rearmed and refueled. The bomb detonates among the fully fueled and armed aircraft, triggering a series of catastrophic explosions. Within minutes, Street Low is engulfed in flames. Secondary explosions rock the ship as bombs and torpedoes cook off in the intense heat. The fires spread so rapidly that damage control efforts are hopeless. At 11:25 in the morning, just 34 minutes after the kamikaze struck, Street Low's captain orders abandon ship. 5 minutes later, a massive explosion tears the escort carrier apart as her magazines detonate. Street Low capsizes and sinks, taking 113 men with her. She is the first Allied ship sunk by an organized kamikaze attack, but she will not be the last. Over the coming months, kamikazes will sink dozens of Allied vessels and damage hundreds more. Throughout the afternoon, rescue operations continue for the survivors of Johnston, Howell, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay. Destroyers and destroyer escorts crisscross the area, pulling exhausted sailors from the oil-covered water. Many men have been in the water for hours, some wounded, all suffering from exposure and fuel oil ingestion. Sharks are a constant threat, attracted by blood and thrashing in the water. The rescue operations are complicated by the presence of Japanese survivors in the same waters, sailors from Chokai, Chikuma, and other damaged ships. American rescue vessels offer aid, but most Japanese sailors refuse, preferring death to capture. Some deliberately swim away from rescue attempts. Others commit suicide rather than be taken prisoner. Those Japanese sailors who do swim to the nearby islands of Leyte and Samar face an even grimmer fate. Filipino guerrillas, who have been fighting the brutal Japanese occupation for 3 years, show no mercy. Armed with bolo knives and seized Japanese weapons, they hunt down the survivors. Few Japanese sailors who reach land will survive the week. As darkness falls on October 25th, the battle off Samar is over. It stands as one of the greatest upsets in naval warfare history. A small, outgunned American formation, turning away a vastly superior enemy force through courage, tactical skill, and sheer determination to fight against impossible odds. But 250 miles to the north, another battle is reaching its climax. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet has found Admiral Ozawa's carrier force, the bait that lured Halsey away from Leyte Gulf in the first place. The final act of the Battle of Leyte Gulf is about to unfold. It is 7:10 in the morning on the 25th of October, 1944. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa stands on the bridge of the fleet carrier Zuikaku as his northern force steams south from Japan toward the Philippines. Ozawa commands Japan's last remaining aircraft carriers, 4 of them, including Zuikaku herself, the sole survivor of the 6 carriers that struck Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Alongside her steam the light carriers Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda. 2 hybrid battleship carriers, Issei and Hyuga, provide heavy gun support. 3 light cruisers and 10 destroyers complete the formation. It appears to be a formidable force, the kind of carrier strike group that dominated the Pacific in 1942. But appearances are deceiving. Ozawa's 4 carriers can muster only 108 aircraft between them, barely a quarter of their normal capacity. Most are flown by inexperienced pilots who received only minimal training before being rushed into combat. They stand no chance against the veteran American Hellcat pilots of Task Force 38. Ozawa knows this. He knows his carriers are sailing to their doom. After the war, he will tell American interrogators, "I expected complete destruction of my fleet, but if Kurita's mission was carried out, that was all I wished." His mission is not to fight. His mission is to die, to sacrifice himself and his ships to draw Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away from Leyte Gulf, opening the way for Admiral Kurita's battleships to break through to the American landing beaches. The plan is working perfectly. The previous day, October 24th, Halsey received scout reports of Ozawa's carrier force approaching from the north. For Halsey and Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 38, this represents the decisive moment they have been waiting for since the Battle of the Philippine Sea 4 months earlier, when Japanese carriers escaped destruction. Halsey is obsessed with destroying Japan's remaining carriers. Japanese naval doctrine has always centered on the aircraft carrier as the decisive weapon, and Halsey assumes the Americans think the same way. If carriers are present, they must be the main threat. At 8:22 in the evening on October 24th, Halsey makes his decision. He orders all of Third Fleet, every carrier, every battleship, every cruiser and destroyer, to steam north and attack Ozawa's formation. He takes everything. San Bernardino Strait, the northern entrance to Leyte Gulf, is left completely unguarded. Earlier that day, Halsey had created Task Force 34, a powerful formation of fast battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, with the stated intention of blocking San Bernardino Strait should Admiral Kurita's center force attempt to break through. But Halsey never actually detaches this force. Instead, he takes it north with him, chasing the carriers. Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, commander of 7th Fleet, intercepts Halsey's radio messages and assumes that Task Force 34 has been left behind to guard the strait. This fatal miscommunication will nearly result in disaster at Samar. But Halsey does not know that Center Force has reversed course and is heading back towards San Bernardino Strait. His last intelligence report showed Kurita retreating to the west after the devastating air attacks in the Sibuyan Sea. He believes the threat from Center Force has been eliminated. Task Force 38 is the most powerful naval formation in the world. 8 large fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, 6 fast battleships, and scores of cruisers and destroyers. Over 1,000 aircraft. Veteran pilots who have been fighting since Guadalcanal and the Solomons. They are about to discover that their enemy is a mere shadow. Powerful ships without aircraft, sailors without air cover, a fleet deliberately offering itself up for slaughter to accomplish a larger strategic goal. At 7:13 in the morning on October 25th, a lookout aboard Zuikaku spots an American scout aircraft breaking through the clouds. Ozawa knows what this means. Within hours, perhaps minutes, the full weight of American air power will descend upon his fleet. The final carrier battle of World War II is about to begin. At 6:00 in the morning, Admiral Mitcher orders Task Force 38 to launch scouts and strike aircraft. He does not have a precise bearing on the Japanese fleet, but he wants his pilots airborne and ready to attack the moment the enemy is located. 180 aircraft take to the air, 60 Hellcat fighters, 65 Helldiver dive bombers, and 55 Avenger torpedo bombers. They circle in formation, waiting for targeting information. At 7:13, a scout Hellcat reports the position of Northern Force, 140 miles north of Task Force 38. Commander David McCampbell, who shot down 9 Japanese aircraft just yesterday, leads the strike group north through perfect flying weather. The Japanese detect the incoming formation on radar at 8:17 in the morning. Ozawa launches 30 Zero fighters, nearly a third of his total air strength, to intercept. 10 minutes later, the American strike group attains visual contact. The Japanese combat air patrol pounces on the formation, but the Hellcat fighters quickly get to work breaking up the interceptors. Within minutes, most of the 30 Zeros have been shot down. Very few will make it back to bases in the Philippines. With the Japanese fighters swept from the sky, the American dive bombers and torpedo aircraft begin their attack runs on Northern Force. The first victim is the destroyer Akitsuki. At 8:37 in the morning, a Helldiver drops a 1,000-pound bomb that penetrates directly into the engine room. The explosion destroys the ship's propulsion, and fires spread rapidly through the lower decks. Within 10 minutes, Akitsuki capsizes and sinks. Commander McCampbell directs 12 Helldivers to attack the light carrier Chitose. This ship narrowly survived destruction at the Battle of the Philippine Sea 4 months earlier. Today, her luck runs out. 8 bombs strike Chitose's flight deck, punching through the thin armor and detonating in the hangar bay below. Avenger torpedo bombers follow immediately, scoring 2 hits on her port side. 4 more bombs from aircraft off Lexington rain down on the burning carrier. Her captain, Commander Yano, works desperately to save the ship, but the flooding is too extensive and the fires too intense. The order to abandon ship is given. Chitose sinks 1 hour later, taking 904 men with her, including Commander Yano, who chooses to go down with his ship. Other ships are targeted in the first wave. The hybrid battleship carrier Ise is attacked by torpedo bombers, but all the torpedoes miss the maneuvering battleship. The light cruiser Tama is hit by a single torpedo that floods her No. 2 boiler room, leaving her dead in the water. Emergency repairs are able to restore propulsion after 30 minutes, but Tama falls far behind the rest of the formation. She will attempt to limp back to Japan alone, a decision that will prove fatal. The light carrier Zuiho is struck by a 500-pound bomb that jams her rear elevator and knocks out the rudder. 3 near misses cave in sections of her hull plating, and she develops a marked list. But her damage control parties work with skill and determination, restoring steering and correcting the list within 30 minutes. Zuiho remains afloat. And then there is Zuikaku, Japan's last fleet carrier, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and the Philippine Sea, survivor of every major carrier battle of the Pacific War. She is Admiral Ozawa's flagship, and she draws the attention of 40 Helldivers and 10 Avengers. Rear Admiral Toshitane Takata, commanding from Zuikaku's bridge, orders flank speed and begins violent evasive maneuvers. Zuikaku manages to evade 2 torpedoes, her captain skillfully presenting the carrier's narrow bow to the torpedo tracks. Her anti-aircraft guns put up a tremendous volume of fire, creating a curtain of steel through which the American aircraft must fly. But there are too many attackers. 4 bombs penetrate Zuikaku's flight deck, causing extensive damage to the hangar bay and starting fires that spread rapidly. A torpedo strikes her port side, knocking out the rudder and causing electrical failures throughout the ship. The carrier develops a marked list, and her speed drops from 24 knots to barely 10. But her damage control parties fight the fires and correct the list with counter-flooding. By 9:00 in the morning, Zuikaku is still afloat, her reputation as a lucky ship intact. The first wave of American aircraft departs, leaving behind 1 destroyer and 1 light carrier sinking and several other ships damaged. But more waves are coming. Many more. As the first strike group returns to their carriers to rearm and refuel, Admiral Halsey, aboard his flagship New Jersey, is receiving increasingly desperate messages from Admiral Kinkaid's 7th Fleet. At 8:22 in the morning, Kinkaid radios, "Fast battleships are urgently needed immediately at Leyte Gulf." Halsey is confident in his decision to pursue the Japanese carriers. He believes Center Force has been defeated and is retreating. He does not fully grasp that a catastrophic battle is unfolding off Samar, where Taffy 3 is fighting for its life against Kurita's battleships and cruisers. More messages arrive from Kinkaid over the next hour, each more urgent than the last. At 10:00 in the morning, Kinkaid transmits in plain language, no encryption, visible to anyone monitoring naval frequencies. "Where is Lee? Send Lee." Vice Admiral Willis Lee commands the fast battleships that Kinkaid believes are guarding San Bernardino Strait. But those battleships are with Halsey, hundreds of miles to the north, pursuing Ozawa's carriers. At Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz has been monitoring the situation with growing concern. He decides to send Halsey a message asking for clarification about the location of the fast battleships. The message, as transmitted, reads, "Turkey trots to water. Where is repeat? Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders." The first 4 words and the last 3 words are padding, meaningless phrases added by cryptographers to confuse Japanese codebreakers who might intercept the message. Standard procedure is for these padding phrases to be obviously irrelevant, allowing the recipient to easily identify and remove them. But the decoder aboard New Jersey makes a fateful error. He removes the first padding phrase, but leaves the last 3 words intact. The message that reaches Halsey reads, "Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders." Halsey believes Admiral Nimitz is not asking a question, but delivering a stinging reprimand, publicly questioning his judgment and competence in the middle of a battle. Witnesses on New Jersey's bridge will later describe what happens next. Halsey tears off his cap and throws it to the deck. His face turns red. He begins to sob, overwhelmed by emotion. His chief of staff, Rear Admiral Robert Carney, grabs Halsey by the shoulders and shakes him. "Stop it! What the hell's the matter with you? Pull yourself together!" It takes several minutes for Halsey to regain his composure. When he does, he makes the decision to detach Task Force 34 and send the fast battleships south to support 7th Fleet at Leyte Gulf. But the battleships must first refuel their escorting destroyers, a process that will take over an hour. By the time Task Force 34 begins steaming south, it is too late to effect the battle off Samar. Taffy 3 will have to fight alone. Meanwhile, Admiral Mitch's carriers continue to pound Ozawa's northern force with wave after wave of attacks. The decisive moment is approaching for Zuikaku, the last Japanese fleet carrier, the last link to the glory days of Pearl Harbor and the early Pacific victories. Her time has come. At noon on October 25th, 160 aircraft from Task Force 38 head north toward the retreating northern force. Admiral Ozawa is retiring as fast as his damaged ships can manage, having accomplished his mission of luring Halsey away from Leyte Gulf. The 90 fighters that remained from his original air complement have all run out of fuel and been forced to ditch in the ocean. The carrier's flight decks are too damaged to recover them, and there is nowhere else for them to land. Ozawa's ships steam north without air cover, completely defenseless against the incoming strike. Strike Commander Theodore Winters ignores the crippled vessels, lagging behind the formation, and directs his aircraft toward the prime target, Zuikaku. Nearly 100 dive bombers and torpedo aircraft bear down on the fleet carrier. Admiral Takata orders emergency maneuvers, but Zuikaku is still making only about 24 knots after the damage from the first strike. At least 5 bombs score direct hits, penetrating the flight deck and exploding in the hangar bay, where fires have been brought under control but not extinguished. The new explosions reignite the fires and cause catastrophic damage to the internal structure. The Avenger torpedo bombers launch an anvil attack, approaching from both sides simultaneously to prevent the carrier from evading. 6 torpedoes slam into Zuikaku's hull along her port side. At 1:27 in the afternoon, Rear Admiral Takata orders all hands to assemble on the flight deck. The order to abandon ship is given. The crew gathers on the listing flight deck as Takata addresses them for the final time. Each man salutes as the Imperial Navy ensign is lowered with ceremony, even as the ship begins her death roll. Zuikaku lists heavily to port, her flight deck tilting at an increasingly steep angle. Men slide into the water as the carrier rolls completely onto her beam ends. 2.5 hours after the order to abandon ship, at approximately 4:00 in the afternoon, Zuikaku capsizes completely and sinks. 842 men are lost with her, including Rear Admiral Takata, who chose to go down with his flagship. The last Japanese fleet carrier, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack fleet, has been destroyed. But the slaughter continues. The light carrier Zuiho, barely maneuvering after damage from earlier strikes, becomes the target of the fourth wave at 3:00 in the afternoon. She is hit by several more bombs and 2 additional torpedoes. Her pumps are overwhelmed by flooding, and she comes to a complete stop, drifting helplessly. At 3:10 in the afternoon, Zuiho rolls over and slips beneath the surface. 215 men are lost. The light carrier Chiyoda has been left behind, crippled and drifting, as the rest of Northern Force steams away. Commander Winters, returning to base after the attack on Zuikaku, spots her from the air. He radios the coordinates to approaching American cruisers, informing them that there are no Japanese battleships in the area to threaten them. At 4:25 in the afternoon, the heavy cruisers Wichita and New Orleans, along with the light cruisers Santa Fe and Mobile, open fire on the helpless Chiyoda from 20,000 yards. Chiyoda returns fire with her 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, the only weapons that can reach that far, but the shells fall hopelessly short. Within 15 minutes, she is a blazing wreck. American destroyers prepare to launch torpedoes to finish her off, but at 4:47 in the afternoon, Chiyoda rolls over and sinks before the torpedoes can be fired. Survivors are visible in the water, but the American ships are denied permission to conduct rescue operations. They must continue pursuing the remnants of Ozawa's fleet. Of the 1,470 officers and men aboard Chiyoda, there are no known survivors. All 4 of Japan's carriers at Cape Engano have been sunk. The age of the Japanese aircraft carrier is over. At 5:30 in the afternoon, the 5th and final wave of American aircraft, 96 planes from Essex, Lexington, Langley, and Enterprise, arrives over the retreating remnants of Ozawa's northern force. With no more carriers left to attack, the pilots focus on the hybrid battleship carriers Issei and Hyuga. These unusual vessels retain their aft flight decks, but mount 14-inch guns forward. The attack is hampered by failing light as the sun sets over the Pacific. The pilots claim 37 confirmed hits on the 2 battleships. Post-war examination of Japanese records reveals the truth. Neither Issei nor Hyuga was struck by a single bomb or torpedo during this attack. In the gathering darkness, the American pilots simply could not see well enough to score hits. Both battleships survived to return to Japan. The final kill of the Battle of Cape Engano goes not to aircraft but to a submarine. USS Jalal, on her first war patrol, picks up a radar contact while surfaced, the crippled light cruiser Tama, attempting to limp back to Japan alone after being torpedoed that morning. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Wenger gives chase and eventually closes to 1,000 yards before firing 3 bow torpedoes. All 3 miss. He fires again from 800 yards, 4 torpedoes from point-blank range. At this distance, it is nearly impossible to miss. 3 of the 4 torpedoes strike Tama along her length. The light cruiser breaks in half and sinks rapidly. All 450 Japanese sailors aboard are lost. The last action of the battle belongs to a single Japanese destroyer. As darkness falls, American cruisers and destroyers continue pursuing the scattered remnants of Northern force. Guided by night fighters from Essex, they discover a group of Japanese ships attempting to rescue survivors from the sunken carriers. At 6:52 in the evening, the American warships open fire. The Japanese destroyer Hatsuzuki, commanded by Captain Shiro Amano, immediately turns toward the American formation in an aggressive charge. Hatsuyuki has no torpedoes left, but Captain Amano maneuvers as if he is launching a torpedo attack, forcing the American cruisers to turn away defensively. For the next 2 hours, Hatsuyuki trades fire with the much larger American force, repeatedly feinting torpedo attacks to keep them at bay, while the other Japanese vessels escape with rescued survivors. The destroyer takes hit after hit from American cruiser main batteries, but Captain Amano refuses to break off. He continues his suicidal holding action, sacrificing his ship and crew to buy time for the others. Just before 9:00 in the evening, Hatsuyuki's ammunition magazines detonate from the accumulated damage. The destroyer explodes and sinks instantly. Of her crew of 280, only 8 men survive. Hatsuyuki's sacrifice marks the end of the Battle of Cape Engano, the final carrier engagement of World War II. The Imperial Japanese Navy has lost 4 aircraft carriers, 1 light cruiser, and 2 destroyers. Over 4,200 Japanese sailors have been killed. The United States has lost only 12 aircraft. Admiral Ozawa has accomplished his mission. He drew Halsey's Third Fleet away from Leyte Gulf, opening the way for Admiral Kurita's battleships to attack the landing beaches. But Kurita turned back. The sacrifice of Ozawa's carriers and 4,000 men achieved nothing. Operation Shogo 1, Japan's last great naval offensive, has failed completely. As dawn breaks on October 26, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf is finally over. 4 days of fighting across 100,000 square miles of ocean have produced what historians will call the largest naval battle in human history. The scale of the engagement is almost incomprehensible. 360 vessels from both sides participated in 4 separate but interconnected battles: Palawan Passage, the Sibuyan Sea, Surigao Strait, off Samar, and Cape Engano. The final accounting of losses reveals the extent of Japan's catastrophe. The Imperial Japanese Navy has lost 28 ships sunk or destroyed, 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Approximately 13,000 Japanese sailors have been killed or are missing. The super battleship Musashi, the largest warship ever sunk by aircraft, rests on the bottom of the Sibuyan Sea. The battleships Fuso and Yamashiro lie in the mud of Surigao Strait. The carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda are scattered across the ocean floor off Cape Engano. American losses, while painful, are far lighter: 7 ships sunk and approximately 3,000 men killed or missing. 2 escort carriers, Princeton and Gambier Bay, have been lost. 2 destroyers, Johnston and Howell, and 1 destroyer escort, Samuel B. Roberts, went down fighting impossible odds off Samar. But the most significant result is not measured in ships or casualties. The Imperial Japanese Navy has ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Japan still possesses scattered warships, the battleship Yamato among them, but they lack the fuel to operate, the trained crews to man them effectively, and the air cover to protect them from American carrier strikes. For the remainder of the war, the Japanese surface fleet will remain largely confined to port. On October 26th, American aircraft continue to hunt down stragglers from the battle. The destroyer Nowaki, carrying survivors from the cruiser Chikuma, is caught and sunk. She is the last ship destroyed in the battle. That same day introduces a horrifying new dimension to the Pacific War: the organized use of kamikaze suicide attacks. Following the success of the attack that sank Streetlow, Japanese commanders will increasingly rely on these tactics. Over the coming months, kamikazes will sink dozens of Allied vessels and damage hundreds more, causing over 15,000 American casualties. The liberation of the Philippines continues for another 2.5 months. The battle for Leyte Island will not be secured until late December, costing thousands of American and Filipino lives. But the Japanese Navy's failure at Leyte Gulf means the Americans can continue landing reinforcements and supplies without fear of naval interdiction. The strategic implications are profound. With the Philippines falling to American forces, the sea lanes connecting Japan to the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies are cut. Japan's war economy, already stretched beyond its limits, begins a terminal decline. The road is now open for the invasion of Okinawa in April of 1945. There, the Japanese Navy will make one final gesture, sending the super battleship Yamato on a one-way suicide mission with only enough fuel to reach Okinawa but not return. American carrier aircraft will sink her on April 7, 1945, before she can reach the island. Admiral William Halsey's decisions during the battle have been scrutinized and debated by historians ever since. His choice to take all of Third Fleet north to chase Ozawa's carriers, leaving San Bernardino Strait unguarded, nearly resulted in catastrophe off Samar. Halsey is not reprimanded and remains in command of Third Fleet through the end of the war. Some historians, including James Hornfisher, argue his decision was defensible given the information available to him at the time. Others consider it an inexcusable error that could have lost the entire Leyte invasion. After the war, Halsey meets with Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, the commander of Taffy 3. Halsey tells him, "I want you to know, I think you wrote the most glorious page in American naval history that day." Sprague's response is cold and measured. For the rest of his life, he will refer to Halsey only as the gentleman who failed to keep his appointment that October. The heroes of the battle receive their recognition. Commander Ernest Evans is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership of USS Johnston, becoming the first Native American in the United States Navy to receive the nation's highest decoration for valor. Commander David McCampbell receives the Medal of Honor for his aerial exploits, including his 9 kills in a single day on October 24th. He will finish the war as the Navy's top ace with 34 confirmed kills. The crew of USS Samuel B. Roberts earns the ship a Presidential Unit citation. She becomes known as the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. The Battle of Leyte Gulf has decided the fate of the Pacific War. Japan can no longer defend its empire. The Americans will continue their inexorable advance toward the home islands. The end is now only a matter of time. The Battle of Leyte Gulf stands today as the largest naval battle in human history, measured by the number of ships engaged, the tonnage involved, and the vast ocean area across which it was fought. It was the last time battleships fought battleships, their massive guns deciding the outcome in the darkness of Surigao Strait. It was the last carrier versus carrier engagement, as American aircraft sent Japan's remaining fleet carriers to the bottom off Cape Engano. The battle demonstrated the complete evolution of naval warfare, from the age of the gun to the age of the aircraft. Air power, not battleships, had become the decisive weapon at sea. Above all, the Battle off Samar stands as one of the greatest upsets in military history, a small, outgunned American force turning away a vastly superior enemy through courage, skill, and an absolute refusal to surrender against impossible odds. The human cost was terrible on both sides. Over 16,000 men died in 4 days of fighting. Japanese sailors refused rescue and died in the water. American destroyermen charged battleships, knowing they would not survive. Filipino guerrillas took revenge on their occupiers. Today, the wrecks lie scattered across the Philippine seafloor. In 2019, the wreck of USS Johnston was discovered at a depth of over 21,000 feet, the deepest shipwreck ever located at that time. Museums and memorials preserve the memory of those who fought. Survivors, now few in number, gather to remember their shipmates who never came home. In 4 days in October of 1944, 200,000 men fought the largest naval battle in human history. We remember them. Their sacrifice secured victory in the Pacific and helped bring an end to the Second World War.